Welcome to Potter Nexus. On the night Voldemort's curse shattered itself, Harry Potter didn't just survive. For one silent heartbeat, his soul passed through the veil of death. He returned breathing, but something ancient returned with him. From that night onward, Harry could hear whispers no child should hear, feel endings before they arrived, and stand calmly where others trembled. This is not the story of the boy who lived. This is the story of the one death did not claim, but marked. Chapter 1. The Reaper's Bastard. The Dursleys didn't leave a light on. Number 4. Privet Drive was a tomb of suburban mediocrity, draped in the kind of silence that makes you want to scream just to see if the air still works. On the porch, a bundle of blankets sat like a discarded grocery bag. Inside that bundle was Harry Potter, a kid who had just survived a literal god-tier hit job by the skin of his teeth, only to be left on a doorstep like a milk delivery. But the universe doesn't play fair, and neither does the veil. Down the street, the shadows didn't just move, they curdled. The streetlights flickered, not because of a power surge, but because something was drinking the electricity. A cold front rolled in that would make a Siberian winter look like a beach day. The air grew heavy, smelling of ozone, old parchment, and the metallic tang of a fresh grave. The space between the sidewalk and the porch ripped open. No sound, no pop, just a silent tear in reality, revealing a void so black it made the night look like noon. Out stepped a silhouette. It wasn't a man, and it wasn't a ghost. It was a glitch in the matrix of life itself. Draped in tatters that moved even when the wind didn't, the entity leaned over the basket. It didn't have eyes, yet it stared. It didn't have a heart, yet it felt the pulse of the boy. Marked, the entity rasped. The voice wasn't heard with ears, it was felt in the marrow of the bones. Claimed by a fragment, but the fragment belongs to the dark. The soul belongs to the end. A skeletal hand, wrapped in smoke and ancient spite, reached out. The protection Lily Potter had died to create, that burning, golden sacrificial ward, flared up. It roared like a sun. It fought, it screamed. Any mortal wizard would have been incinerated. Any dementor would have been evaporated. The entity didn't even flinch. It reached through the golden fire like it was lukewarm water. Its fingers touched the lightning bolt scar. The scream that erupted from the infant Harry Potter wasn't the cry of a baby. It was a dual-tone shish. Reek, the sound of a Horcrux being forcibly evicted from a living vessel. A jet of black sludge leaked from the scar, sizzling against the frost-covered blankets. The entity didn't destroy the fragment, it inhaled it. It tasted the soul of Tom Riddle and found it, mid-tier. Little King, the shadow hissed, scooping the child into an embrace that should have frozen his blood solid. The wizards want you to be a savior. The monsters want you to be a snack. I want you to be the echo. The entity stepped backward. The void yawned wide, showing a glimpse of a world where the sky was a bruised purple and the ground was made of memories. Check please, a voice whispered from the shadows of the bushes, a stray cat that wasn't a cat at all, but a witness. Arabella Fig didn't see the entity. She only saw the space where the boy was supposed to be. She saw the frost. She saw the emptiness. The veil closed. The void. 10 years later. If you think hell is fire and brimstone, you've got zero imagination. Real hell is the gray. It's a place where time is a suggestion and the geography is built out of the things people forgot. Harry, though nobody called him that here, stood on a cliffside made of petrified screams. He was 10, but his eyes looked like they'd seen the Big Bang and stayed for the credits. He wasn't wearing hand-me-downs from a fat cousin. He was wrapped in a cloak woven from tea. He hair of hags and the shadows of executed traitors. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a problem. You're thinking again, a voice boomed behind him. Harry didn't turn. He just watched the the spectral tide crashed against the shores of the afterlife below. I'm thinking about the pull, Thanatos. It's getting louder. The entity, the one that had snatched him from Privet Drive, loomed over him. In the gray, it took a more solid form. A towering figure in obsidian plate armor, its face a mask of polished silver with no features. The mortal realm is a magnet, and you are the iron, Thanatos stated. The blood in your veins is still tethered to the sun. I've fed you the essence of the fallen, I've taught you the languages of the dead, and I've broken your bones just to see them knit back together with shadow stuff. But you are still, fundamentally, a breach of contract. Harry turned, his movements fluid and predatory. There was no boyish charm here. His skin was pale, almost translucent. And his hair didn't just sit on his head, it seemed to drift in a non-existent breeze. The contract says I'm dead, Harry said, his voice a low, American accented drawl, a byproduct of the millions of souls he'd spent a decade conversing with. The Vale was a melting pot of every soul that ever kicked the bucket, and Harry had spent his childhood being tutored by the best and worst of them. The wizards think I'm a legend. The goblins think I'm an inheritance. I think I'm a debt that hasn't been paid. Today is the day, Thanatos said, handing Harry a staff made of white elderwood, stained black by the sticks. The old man with the twinkling eyes is casting his nets. He thinks he can summon the boy who lived back to his board. He wants a weapon. He wants a sacrificial lamb. Harry took the staff. The moment his fingers closed around it, the ground beneath him cracked. Black sparks jumped between his knuckles. He's gonna be real disappointed when he finds out what he's actually pulling out of the hat. Harry muttered. Go, Thanatos commanded. Remind them that death doesn't take sides. Death takes everything. Hogwarts, the Great Hall. Albus Dumbledore was a man who prided himself on his composure. He'd stared down Grindelwald, he'd managed the ego of Voldemort, and he could find the lemon drop in a bowl of rocks. But as the sorting ceremony began, his hand shook just a little. The search for Harry Potter had been the greatest failure of his life. For 10 years, the boy had vanished. No trace, no magical signature, even the blood wards had simply evaporated. But today, the goblet of fire, which had been strangely lit for the welcoming feast as a symbol of hope, was acting up. The flames weren't blue, they were a sickly, necrotic green. Albus, Minerva whispered, her face ashen. The air, it's cold. It wasn't just cold, it was the kind of cold that kills plants in their pots. The enchanted ceiling, usually a reflection of the night sky, turned into a swirling vortex of ash-gray clouds. The candles flickered out, one by one, until the only light came from the shivering green flame of the goblet. The students were silent, even the Weasley twins had stopped whispering. The tension in the room was a physical weight, pressing down on their chests. Then, the goblet exploded. Not a messy explosion of wood and fire, but a silent burst of darkness. From the center of the hall, a pillar of shadow erupted, punching through the floorboards and reaching for the ceiling. A figure stepped out of the dark. He looked about 11, but he carried himself like an apex predator. He wore black robes that seemed to drink the light, and a staff that hummed with a frequency that made everyone's teeth ache. His green eyes weren't bright or hopeful, they were the color of the killing curse. Glowing with an internal, radioactive heat, Harry Potter had arrived, and he looked like he was there to collect a soul, not learn transfiguration. The silence was deafening. Dumbledore stood, his wand instinctively in his hand, a move he hadn't made in public for decades. Harry, Dumbledore's voice cracked. Harry Potter. The boy looked at the headmaster. He didn't smile, he didn't cry, he just tilted his head, his gaze cutting through Dumbledore's enchantments like a hot knife through butter. Potter is a name for the living, the boy said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Cold and sharp as a razor. The Vale calls me something else. What have you become? Minerva gasped, clutching her chest. Harry took a step forward. With every hoof-like thud of his boots, frost spread across the stone floor. He looked at the great hall, the gold, the food, the bright-faced children, and he felt a profound sense of disgust. It was all so loud, so temporary. I'm the thing you've been running from since you learned your first spell, Professor, Harry said. He raised his staff, and the shadows in the room began to stand up, detaching themselves from the walls. I'm the inevitable. He walked toward the high table. The teachers recoiled. Severus Snape, usually the master of intimidation, felt his fight-or-flight response scream, flight, for the first time in his adult life. He saw Lily's eyes, but there was no Lily in there. There was only the abyss. Harry stopped in front of Dumbledore. He was a foot shorter than the old man, but he seemed to tower over the entire castle. You tried to hide me in a house of sheep, Harry said. You tried to bind me to a destiny written by a drunk fraud in a pub. But the Vale took me first. I've spent 10 years in the place where dreams go to rot. I've walked the halls of the silent city. I've tasted the breath of the great beyond. Harry leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that everyone somehow heard. I didn't come here to go to school, Albus. I came here because the balance is off. There's a man who cheated death. A man who split his soul into pieces like a coward. And since I am the only one here who actually works for the Reaper, I'm here to audit the books. Dumbledore's eyes lost their twinkle. For the first time, he looked his age. He looked ancient. He looked terrified. Harry, please, you don't understand the forces you're playing with. Harry laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound. Playing, old man, I've been juggling those forces since I lost my baby teeth. You use magic as a tool. I am the magic, and right now, this castle smells like a rotting soul. He turned to the student body. Some were crying, some were frozen. Draco Malfoy looked like he was about to pass out. My name is Harry Potter, the boy announced, his voice booming with a power that shook the very foundations of Hogwarts. And the holiday is over. The dead are restless, and they sent me to tell you one thing. He slammed the base of his staff into the floor. A shockwave of cold air blasted through the hall, blowing out the remaining windows. The end isn't coming, Harry growled. It's already here, and it's hungry. He walked toward the Gryffindor table. The students scrambled to get out of his way, falling over benches in their haste. Harry sat down at the end of the table, alone. He didn't look for friends. He didn't look for a feast. He just stared at the empty space in front of him, waiting. The Sorting Hat, sitting on its stool, began to whimper. It didn't sing a song. It didn't make a joke. It just folded in on itself, trying to hide. Put it on, Harry said, not looking at the hat. Professor McGonagall, her hands shaking violently, picked up the hat. She ached the boy as if she were walking toward a live bomb. She placed the hat on his messy, dark hair. The hat didn't shout. It didn't think. It screamed, nothing. There is nothing left but the cold. Azkaban, the void, the beyond. He belongs to the veil. The hat burst into gray flames, turning to ash on top of Harry's head. Harry didn't even blink. He just brushed the soot off his forehead, revealing the scar, which wasn't a scar anymore. It was an open window to a dark nebula, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the heartbeat of the world. Gryffindor, I guess, Harry muttered. The rest of the night was a blur of panicked whispers and frantic faculty meetings. But Harry didn't care. He stayed in his seat, watching the shadows move in the corners of the room. He could see them, the ghosts of Hogwarts. Not the pearly white ones like Nick or the Fat Friar, but the real ones. The ones who stayed in the cracks. The ones who were too angry to leave. They were bowing to him. One of them, a rag-ed spirit of a medieval student who had died in the dungeons, drifted closer. My lord, the one who remains, he is here. In the back of the man with the turban. Harry's eyes shifted to Professor Quirrell, who was currently hyperventilating into a napkin at the head table. Harry saw it then, not the man, but the parasite. A weeping, jagged wound in the fabric of life, clinging to the back of the teacher's skull. Harry's lip curled. Found you, he whispered. The air in the great hall grew even thinner. The gargoyles on the walls began to groan, their stone eyes turning toward the boy who shouldn't exist. This wasn't a story about a hero. This wasn't a story about a chosen one. This was a story about the day death stopped waiting and started hunting. Harry stood up, his cloak billowing around him like living smoke. He didn't wait for the prefects. He didn't wait for instructions. He walked out of the great hall, his staff clicking against the stone. Thump, click, a metro. Known for the impending doom of everyone who thought they could control the dark. As he reached the doors, he stopped and looked back at Dumbledore. By the way, Albus, Harry called out, his voice on with the weight of 1,000 graves. Tell the ministry to stop looking for me. I'm not a citizen of their world anymore. I'm a citizen of the one they're all going to. He stepped out into the hallway, and the doors slammed shut with the force of a thunderclap, sealing the great hall in a silence so thick it felt like drowning. The boy who lived was dead. Long live the King of the Vale. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. The Anatomy of a Ghost. The Gryffindor dormitories were built for warmth, scarlet hangings, roaring fireplaces, and the cozy scent of old wood and toasted marshmallows. But as Harry stepped across the threshold of the boys' tower, the fire didn't just dim, it died. The embers turned to gray ash in an instant, and the stone walls began to weep a thin, crystalline layer of frost. The other first years, Ron Weasley, Neville Longbottom, Seamus Finnegan, and Dean Thomas, stood huddled near the window, looking at Harry like he was a stray wolf that had somehow wandered into a sheep pen. You can't just kill the fire, man, Ron stammered, his face pale, his freckles standing out like rust spots on parchment. It's freezing. Harry didn't look at him. He walked to the bed at the far end of the room. It wasn't his bed yet, but the moment he sat on the mattress, the red velvet curtains turned a dull, bruised charcoal. He laid his staff across his lap. The white wood seemed to pulse. A heartbeat of pure necrotic energy that made the air thrum. "The fire isn't dead," Harry said, his voice low and raspy, carrying that strange, haunting American drawl. "It's just hiding. Elements have instincts, too. They know when something heavier than them enters the room." "What are you?" Neville whispered, clutching a toad that looked like it was trying to vibrate out of existence. Harry finally looked up. His eyes weren't just green, they were luminous, like swamp gas caught in a bottle. "I'm the consequence of a mistake, Neville. Don't worry about the cold. You'll get used to it. The living usually do, right before they stop being living." He didn't sleep. Harry Potter hadn't slept in the traditional sense since the veil took him. In the Grey, sleep was a dangerous luxury. Instead, he slipped into a trance, his consciousness drifting out of his body like a tethered kite. He floated through the stone walls of Hogwarts. To anyone else, the castle was a school. To Harry, it was a massive, sentient tomb. He saw the ley lines, veins of blue magical energy, throbbing deep beneath the floorboards. But he also saw the black rot. The places where blood had been spilled and never cleansed. The places where the old magic of the founders had turned sour and fermented into something jagged. He drifted toward the third-floor corridor. Dumbledore had warned them all about a painful death if they entered. To Harry, that wasn't a warning, it was a roadmap. He moved through the locked door as if the wood were smoke. Inside sat a Cerberus, 3 heads, 6 eyes, and enough muscle to crush a dragon. The beast roared, 3 throats harmonizing into a sound that should have woken the entire castle. But the sound hit Harry's spectral form and shattered. Harry solidified. He stood before the monster, his presence expanding until he filled the room with a cold that made the Cerberus's drool freeze into icicles before it hit the floor. "Quiet," Harry commanded. The beast froze. The middle head sniffed the air, its nostrils flaring. It didn't smell a boy. It smelled the great beyond. It smelled the thing that eventually eats all monsters. The Cerberus didn't bark again. It whimpered, its massive paws sliding on the stone as it tried to back into a corner, its 3 tails tucked between its legs. "Good boy," Harry muttered, walking past the beast toward the trapdoor it was guarding. He didn't need to open it. He could feel what was underneath. A stone. A red, pulsing heart of alchemical blasphemy. The Philosopher's Stone. Immortality, Harry hissed, the word tasting like copper in his mouth. A bribe for the Reaper. A middle finger to the natural order. He could hear the stone crying out. It was made of souls, or at least the essence of them. It was a concentrated violation of the Veil's laws. Nicholas Flamel had been dodging his tab for 6 centuries, and the stone was his ledger. "Harry Potter." The voice didn't come from the room. It came from the shadows behind him. Harry didn't turn. He knew that scent. Sandalwood and old, dusty power. "You're out of bed, Headmaster," Harry said. Albus Dumbledore stepped out of the darkness, his colorful robes looking muted and gray in Harry's proximity. He wasn't holding his wand, but his hands were tucked into his sleeves, a ready stance. "As are you, Harry. And I see you've made a friend of Hagrid's little pet." Dumbledore looked at the cowering Cerberus with a mix of sadness and intrigue. "Most people would have been eaten. You seem to have reminded him of his ancestors in the underworld." "Fluffy is a Greek breed," Harry said, turning around. "He knows who I represent. He knows I'm the one who opens the gate when his shift is over." Dumbledore walked closer, his eyes scanning Harry's face, searching for the boy he had failed. "You talk as if you are a servant of the grave, Harry. But you are a child. You have a heart that beats. You have blood that runs warm. Why do you embrace the shroud so tightly?" Harry stepped toward the headmaster, his staff clicking. "Because the shroud is the only thing that didn't leave me on a doorstep in the rain, Albus. When the light abandoned me to a family that would have kept me in a cupboard under the stairs, the dark picked me up. The veil raised me. It gave me a name. It gave me a purpose. And what is that purpose?" "To balance the books," Harry said, his eyes glowing brighter. "This school is a mess. You've got a ghost teaching history who doesn't even know he's dead. You've got a poltergeist that's a literal manifestation of adolescent trauma. And you've got a man in your staff room with a dead god strapped to the back of his head." Dumbledore stiffened. The twinkle in his eyes didn't just fade, it died. "You know of Professor Quirrell." "I see him," Harry corrected. "I see the way the soul fragment is eating him from the inside out. It's messy. It's amateur. It's an insult to the art of necromancy." Tom Riddle was a hack. Dumbledore flinched at the name. "You know who he is." "I ate the piece of him that was in my head," Harry said casually, as if talking about a snack. It was bitter, full of daddy issues and a fear of the dark. He's not a Dark Lord, Albus. He's a scared little boy who thinks if he collects enough trinkets, he won't have to face the music. But everyone faces the music eventually. I'm just the conductor. The headmaster looked at Harry with a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. I wanted you to have a life, Harry. A normal, happy life. Normal is a lie told by people who are afraid of the truth, Harry snapped. The truth is that we are all just meat and memories, waiting for the transition. You've spent a century trying to delay that transition for yourself and others. But you can't stop it. Not with your wand, and certainly not with that red rock under the floor. Harry pointed his staff at the trapdoor. That stone shouldn't exist. It's a clog in the drain of the universe. I'm going to take it. And then I'm going to take Riddle. And then, maybe, I'll take a look at you. Dumbledore's hand twitched toward his sleeve. I cannot let you do that, Harry. The stone is not yours to take. And the world is not ready for the kind of balance you offer. The tension in the room snapped like a frozen wire. Harry didn't pull a wand. He didn't need to. He simply exhaled, and the shadows in the room rose up like tidal waves. They wrapped around Dumbledore's legs, climbing his robes like black ivy. You're fast, Albus, Harry said, his voice echoing with 1,000 overlapping whispers. But you're a wizard. You manipulate the world. I rule the end of it. Don't test me. I'm not the savior you were looking for. I'm the guy who cleans up the mess after the heroes fail. The shadows tightened. Dumbledore let out a sharp breath, his own magic flaring, a brilliant, golden aura that fought back the darkness. For a moment, the room was split, gold versus black, life versus the void. Then, Harry pulled back. The shadows retreated, melting into the floorboards. Not tonight, Harry said, his eyes dimming. The balance hasn't tipped far enough yet. But keep your stone, Albus. Hide it, guard it, it won't matter. When the time comes, I'll walk through your wards like they're cobwebs. Harry turned and walked toward the door. The Cerberus let out a long, low whine as he passed. Harry, Dumbledore called out, his voice sounding old and fragile. Do you still have your mother's heart? Or did the veil take that, too? Harry stopped at the door. He didn't turn around. My mother died to give me life. Harry said, the veil kept me to give me power. I think she'd be happy to know that her son is the only thing in this world that isn't afraid of the dark. He stepped out and vanished into the shadows of the corridor. The next morning, the Great Hall was a hive of rumors. The boy who lived had vanished from his dorm in the middle of the night and returned just before dawn. Smelling of old ozone and wet earth, Harry sat at the Gryffindor table, ignoring the stares. He didn't eat the bacon or the eggs. He sat with a single cup of black coffee, watching the stay rise in patterns that only he could read. Hey, a voice said. Harry looked up. It was a girl with bushy hair and a stack of books that looked heavy enough to kill a man. Hermione Granger. She was vibrating with a mix of terror and intellectual curiosity. I've looked you up, she said, her voice high and fast. In every book, the rise and fall of the dark arts, great wizards of the 20th century, modern magical history. They all say you disappeared on November 1st, 1981. They say you were a miracle. Harry took a sip of his coffee. Books are just paper and lies, Granger. They tell you what people want to believe happened. They don't tell you where the bodies are buried. Hermione flinched but didn't back down. You're different. The way you speak, the way the magic reacts to you. I've been reading about necromancy. It's forbidden, you know. It's classified as a grade A non-tradable malediction. Laws are for people who think they have a choice, Harry said. The dead don't care about the Ministry of Magic. They don't care about forbidden. They care about the truth. And what is the truth? She asked, leaning in, her fear momentarily losing out to her need to know. Harry leaned forward, his glowing eyes locking onto hers. Hermione felt a chill crawl up her spine that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It felt like her soul was being weighed on a scale. The truth, Harry whispered, is that this school is a graveyard with a bell schedule. And you, Granger, are far too smart to spend your life learning how to turn buttons into beetles while a war is brewing under your feet. He stood up, his cloak sweeping the floor. Come on, we're late for potions, and I hear the dungeon master has a soul that's particularly sour. I want to see if he's as brave as he thinks he is. The dungeons. Severus Snape was a man of shadows. He thrived in the damp, dark corners of Hogwarts, using fear as a primary teaching tool. He had spent years perfecting his entrance, the billowing robes, the slamming door, the cold, clinical speech about the subtle science and exact art of potion making. But today, the shadows didn't belong to him. As Snape paced the front of the classroom, his eyes kept darting to the back row. There sat Harry Potter. The boy wasn't taking notes. He wasn't looking at his cauldron. He was just staring. Snape felt a cold sweat prickling at his hairline. He looked at Harry and saw Lily's eyes, but he also saw the dark mark on his own arm pulse with a rhythmic, aching throb. It was as if the boy's presence was calling out to the dead skin of the brand, reminding it of its master. Potter, Snape barked, his voice cracking slightly. Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? The class went silent. Hermione's hand shot into the air, but Snape ignored her. Harry didn't even blink. He leaned back in his chair, his hands laced behind his head. Asphodel is a lily. It's the flower of the dead. It grows in the meadows of the underworld where the ordinary souls go to wander. Wormwood is bitterness. It's the taste of regret. Harry leaned forward, his eyes boring into Snape's. You're asking me how to make the draft of living death. But you don't need a potion for that, Severus. You've been drinking it for 10 years. You're a man walking in his own funeral procession, clutching a memory of a woman who wouldn't recognize the shell you've become. The silence in the dungeon was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in the Great Hall 3 floors up. Snape turned white, not just pale. He looked like he'd been drained of every drop of blood. His hand gripped the edge of his desk so hard the wood groaned. 5 points from Gryffindor, Snape whispered, his voice trembling with a rage that was borderline hysterical. For your cheek. Take all the points you want, Harry said, standing up. He didn't wait for the bell. He didn't wait for permission. Points are for children. I'm here for the truth. And the truth is, Professor, your master is coming back. Not because he's strong, but because people like you are too weak to let him stay dead. Harry walked toward the door. As he passed Snape, the air temperature dropped to absolute zero. Snape's breath hitched, a puff of white mist escaping his lips. She's not in the veil, by the way, Harry said, stopping at the door. Snape froze. What, you're Lily? Harry said, his voice softening just a fraction, though it remained as cold as a tombstone. She didn't stay in the gray. She moved on. She's in the light, which means she's the one thing in this universe I can't touch. And the one thing you'll never see again, unless you stop being a servant of the dark and start being a man. Harry walked out, the heavy oak door swinging shut behind him with a sound like a coffin lid closing. Snape stood alone at the front of the room, surrounded by terrified 11-year-olds. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking. He looked at the cauldron of asphodel and wormwood. For the first time in a decade, the master of the dungeons felt like he was the one being haunted. The Forbidden Forest, midnight. Harry didn't need a map. He followed the scent of silver. Deep in the heart of the forest, the air was thick with the smell of metallic blood and ancient, dying magic. Harry walked through the undergrowth, the thorns parting for him as if they were afraid to snag his robes. He found it in a clearing drenched in moonlight. A unicorn. It was pure white, its coat shining like a fallen star. But it was dying. A dark, hooded figure was hunched over it, its face buried in a jagged wound in the creature's flank. The figure was drinking the silver blood, the ultimate sin, a life sustained by the murder of the innocent. Harry didn't shout. He didn't draw his staff. He just watched. The hooded figure, Quirrell, possessed by the wraith of Voldemort, sensed him. It looked up, silver blood dripping from its chin like liquid mercury. It hissed, a sound of pure, unadulterated malice. Potter, the voice whispered, a dual tone of the stuttering professor and the high, cold screech of the Dark Lord. You smell of the master. You smell of the end. Tom, Harry said, his voice flat. You're making a mess. Drinking unicorn blood, that's low, even for a guy who got beat by a toddler. The figure rose, hovering inches off the ground. The shadows around it coiled like snakes. I am immortal. I have transcended the petty boundaries of life and death. No, Harry said, taking a step into the clearing. The frost followed him, turning the grass to brittle glass. You've just made yourself a ghost with an ego. You're a squatter in a body that isn't yours. You're a parasite. I will kill you, boy. I will finish what I started in Godric's Hollow. Harry laughed. It was the laugh of a god watching an ant try to lift a mountain. You can't kill what's already been claimed, Tom. I've walked the halls of the Vale. I've spoken to the things that make you look like a bedtime story. You're not a Dark Lord. You're a glitch in my system. Harry raised his hand. The shadows of the trees, massive, ancient oaks, suddenly detached themselves from the trunks. They surged forward, forming a cage of solid darkness around the hooded figure. What is this? This is not wizard magic. Voldemort screamed, his voice cracking. It's not, Harry agreed. It's the law, and the law says that which is dead must return to the earth. The shadows tightened, crushing the figure. Quirrell's body let out a sickening crunch, but the wraith within shrieked and exploded outward in a burst of black smoke. The smoke swirled in the air, forming the twisted, screaming face of Voldemort. This is not over, Potter. I will find a way. I will return. The wraith flew off into the deep forest, fleeing the cold light of the boy's gaze. Harry didn't chase him. He looked down at the unicorn. It was still breathing, but only just. Its eyes were glazed, its life force leaking into the dirt. Harry knelt beside it. He placed his hand on its neck. It's okay, Harry whispered. The transition doesn't have to hurt. He didn't use a spell. He just opened a small, controlled tear in the veil right there in the clearing. A soft, gray light spilled out, not the cold, terrifying dark of his power, but the gentle, peaceful mist of the after. The unicorn's eyes cleared. It looked at Harry, let out one final, silvery breath, and then its body faded into light. Its soul didn't linger. It didn't wander. It walked straight into the mist, guided by the hand of the boy who lived in the gap. Harry stood up, his robe stained with silver blood. He looked up at the moon, his expression unreadable. 1 down, Harry said to the empty forest. 6 to go. Quote. He turned and began the long walk back to the castle. The forest was silent. The spiders had fled. The centaurs were hiding in the brush, watching him with wide, terrified eyes. They had seen the stars. They had seen the prophecies. But they had never seen a child carry the weight of the graveyard on his shoulders. As Harry reached the edge of the trees, he saw a figure waiting for him. It was a girl, red hair, small for her age, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. Ginny Weasley. She was supposed to be at home, but she was here, standing at the gates of Hogwarts. Drawn by a pull she didn't understand. You're him, she whispered. The boy from the stories. Harry walked past her, the cold air snapping at her heels. The stories are wrong, Ginny, Harry said without stopping. The hero didn't survive, he just got a better job. He disappeared into the castle, leaving the girl standing in the cold, staring at the spot where the shadows had danced for their master. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. The Architecture of Bone. The air in the library of Hogwarts didn't just smell like old paper anymore, it smelled like the deep, pressurized stillness of a vault. Harry sat in the restricted section, the iron gates having swung open for him without a touch, recognizing a signature of power older than the school's foundations. Before him lay the magic-mossed evil. Most wizards felt their stomachs churn just looking at the binding. Harry flipped the pages with the casual indifference of a man reading a diner menu. You're looking for the Horcruxes, a voice whispered. Harry didn't look up. He didn't have to. The Grey Lady, the ghost of Ravenclaw, was hovering a few inches off the floor to his left. Unlike the other ghosts, who acted like translucent parodies of their former selves, Helena Ravenclaw looked at Harry with a piercing, desperate clarity. She recognized the scent of the veil. I'm looking for the anchors, Harry corrected, his American drawl cutting through the damp silence. Riddle didn't just split his soul, he stapled it to the physical plane. It's messy work. It's like trying to keep a sinking ship afloat by tying it to the shore with dental floss. Eventually, the tide wins. Helena drifted closer, her spectral dress fluttering in a wind only she could feel. He came to me once. Flattered me. Stole my mother's diadem. He turned a symbol of wisdom into a cage for his own rot. Harry finally closed the book, the thud echoing like a coffin lid. I know. I can feel it. It's in this castle. A jagged little poo. LSE of ego hidden in a room that thinks it's invisible. The room of hidden things, Helena breathed. But you cannot simply destroy it. A soul fragment is a puncture wound in reality. If you tear it out, the surrounding space bleeds. Harry stood up, his staff, the Elder Styx branch, clicking against the stone. I don't tear, Helena. I harvest. There's a difference. The 7th floor. Harry paced, 3 times in front of the blank stretch of wall across from the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy. He didn't think about needing a place to hide. He thought about the void. He thought about the hunger of the veil. The way it yearned to reclaim the pieces of the universe that had gone rogue. The door materialized, Not the polished wood of the school, but a slab of ancient, salt-crusted slate. Harry stepped inside. The room of requirement had manifested as a cathedral of junk. Towers of broken furniture, mountains of forbidden books, and thousands of years of student secrets reached toward a ceiling lost in shadow. It was a graveyard of lost things. Harry closed his eyes. He didn't use his sight, he used his pulse. Thump cold, thump void. In the distance, tucked inside a tarnished bust of an ugly warlock, something screamed. It wasn't a sound heard by the ears, but a psychic shriek of a cornered animal. The diadem of Ravenclaw was aware. It knew its predator had arrived. Harry began to walk. As he moved, the piles of junk shivered. Objects that had been dormant for centuries, cursed necklaces, old quills, shattered mirrors, vibrated in his wake. They weren't reacting to his magic, they were bowing to his authority. He reached the bust. The diadem sat atop it, its blue stone pulsing with a sickly, rhythmic light. Harry Potter, a voice hissed from the jewelry. It was the same voice from the forest, but clearer. More arrogant. The boy who was traded. Why serve the end when you can rule the middle? Put me on. With my wisdom and your reach, we could rebuild the world in our image. Harry looked at the crown. He saw the beautiful craftsmanship, and he saw the black, oily sludge of Tom Riddle's soul wrapped around it like a parasite. You talk too much, Tom, Harry said. You like a telemarketer for the apocalypse. Nobody's buying. You think you can destroy a Horcrux with that stick? The diadem mocked, the air around it beginning to warp. It requires fiendfire. It requires basilisk venom. Things a child cannot. Harry didn't wait. He didn't use fire. He reached out with his bare hand and grabbed the diadem. The room screamed. A shockwave of pure malice erupted from the Horcrux, trying to liquefy Harry's internal organs, trying to melt his brain with images of his own death. It showed him Lily dying. It showed him the cold, lonely years in the gray. Harry didn't flinch. He absorbed the pain, letting it flow through him and down into the floorboards. You're trying to scare a guy who grew up in the cellar of the universe, Harry growled, his hand tightening on the silver. I am the dark, Tom. You're just a flashlight with dying batteries. Harry's eyes flared a brilliant, necrotic white. He didn't crush the diadem. Instead, he opened his mouth and inhaled. The black mist, the soul fragment, was ripped out of the metal. It clawed at the air, forming a face of smoke that shrieked in agony as it was sucked into Harry's lungs. It was like drinking liquid lead and concentrated spite. Harry's body jerked. His veins turned black, visible through his pale skin like a map of a cursed city. He felt Riddle's memories, the orphanage, the cold, the first time he killed. The obsession with the Hallows flooded his mind. Then, with a violent shudder, Harry forced the energy down. He processed the soul fragment, stripping away the ego, the memory, and the humanity, leaving only the raw, stolen life force. He fed it to the veil. The diadem clattered to the floor. It was no longer pulsing. The blue stone was clear, beautiful, and empty. Harry fell to one knee, gasping for air that felt too thin for his lungs. His skin was smoking, too, he wheezed, wiping a trail of black bile from his lip. That was, remarkably reckless, a voice said from the shadows of a wardrobe. Harry didn't even look. The shadows are getting crowded tonight. You want a piece of this too, Malfoy? Draco Malfoy stepped out, his face the color of a sheet. He had followed Harry, driven by a cocktail of family pressure and a terrifying curiosity about the boy who made the dark arts look like child's play. My father said you were a fluke, Draco whispered, staring at the inert diadem. He said the Dark Lord would return and punish the pretenders. But I saw that. You ate it. Harry stood up, his height seeming to increase as the room's shadows gathered around his shoulders like a royal mantle. He walked toward Draco, the clicking of his staff sounding like a countdown. Your father is a decorator, Draco. He wears the mask and plays the part, but he's terrified of the actual dark. He serves a master who is afraid of dying. Harry stopped inches from Malfoy, the cold radiating off him making the blonde boy's teeth chatter. I don't serve anyone. I'm the bill collector. Tell your father that the dead is being called in. Every drop of blood spilled in the name of the Dark Lord is a line in my ledger. Draco looked into Harry's eyes and saw the infinite. He didn't see a classmate. He saw a natural disaster in a school uniform. What are you going to do to us? Draco asked, his voice breaking. Harry leaned in, his breath smelling of winter and old coins. If you stay out of my way, nothing. If you try to play soldier for a dead man, I'll show you what lies beyond the veil. And trust me, Draco, there are no Malfoys there. There's just the silence. Harry walked past him, leaving the boy trembling in the wreckage of the room. The headmaster's office. Dumbledore sat behind his desk, watching the silver instruments on his shelves spin and whistle. One by one, they were stopping. The ones keyed to Harry's well-being had turned to lead days ago. The ones keyed to the castle's wards were now vibrating at a frequency that suggested the walls were screaming. The door burst open. Not a knock, not a spell, the locks simply ceased to exist. Harry walked in. He looked exhausted, but he carried a terrifying momentum. Behind him, the shadows of the hallway seemed to linger, refusing to leave his presence. "It's done," Harry said, tossing the empty diadem onto Dumbledore's desk. It spun once and came to rest next to a bowl of lemon drops. Dumbledore read at the relic of his old friend's house. He reached out a trembling hand, touching the cool metal. "Ravenclaw's lost diadem. You found it." "I found a parasite," Harry said, pulling a chair out and sitting down. He didn't ask. "I removed it. Tom's got 5 lives left, plus the main ghost. The cup in the vault, the locket in the cave, the snake, and the ring." Dumbledore looked up, his blue eyes sharp behind his half-moon spectacles. "How could you possibly know about the others? Even I have only suspected. When you eat a piece of a man's soul, you get the table of contents," Harry said. He looked at Dumbledore's right hand, which was tucked into his robe. "Speaking of the ring, why don't you show me that hand, Albus?" The office went still. Fawkes the Phoenix let out a low, mournful note from his perch. Slowly, Dumbledore drew his hand out. It was blackened, shriveled, and dead. A curse of incredible potency was crawling up his arm, held back only by the headmaster's immense will. And a series of golden magical bindings. "The Peverell ring," Harry whispered, his eyes narrowing. "You found it. You saw the stone. You thought you could bring them back, didn't you? The ones you lost. The sister. The mother." Dumbledore's face crumpled. For a second, he wasn't the leader of the light. He was just a grieving old man who had made a catastrophic mistake. "The temptation was profound, Harry. I was weak. You were mortal," Harry corrected, standing up and walking around the desk. "Mortals always think they can negotiate with the grave. They think if they're smart enough, or good enough, they can get a refund." Harry grabbed Dumbledore's blackened wrist. The headmaster gasped as the cold from Harry's grip clashed with the searing rod of the curse. "This is a withered limb curse," Harry noted, his thumb tracing the dead veins. "It's designed to eat the soul from the extremities inward. Tom really outdid himself with this one. It is fatal," Dumbledore said softly. "Severus has given me a year. Perhaps less. Severus is a chemist. I'm the landlord." Harry closed his eyes. The room began to shake. The portraits of past headmasters began to shout, some in fear, some in outrage. Fawkes took flight, circling the room in a frantic golden blur. "Harry, stop," Dumbledore warned. "The magic is too volatile." "Quiet." Harry didn't use a wand. He pressed his forehead against Dumbledore's withered hand. A low, guttural chant began to pour from his lips, a language that sounded like grinding stones and falling earth. It was the tongue of the veil. The blackness on Dumbledore's arm began to move. It didn't vanish, it migrated. Like a colony of ants, the rot flowed from the headmaster's skin onto Harry's. Dumbledore's breath hitched. He watched in horror as his own flesh turned pink and healthy again, while Harry's arm turned the color of a week-old corpse. Harry let go, stumbling back. He clutched his now dead arm, his face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated agony. "Harry, why?" Dumbledore cried, rushing around the desk to support the boy. Harry pushed him away, his breathing ragged. He looked at his blackened arm, the curse now anchored in a vessel that was already half attuned to death. "Because," Harry spat, the necrotic energy swirling in his eyes, "I need you on the board for a little longer, Albus. You're the only one who can keep the mini. Stry off my back while I finish the harvest. Consider it a loan, but don't get comfortable. That arm is mine now. It belongs to the veil." Harry stood up straight, though his shoulder hung at a heavy angle. He looked at the headmaster with a terrifying, predatory smirk. "The ring, Albus. Give it to me, now." Dumbledore reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy gold ring set with a cracked black stone. The Resurrection Stone. The second Hallow. Harry took it. The moment the stone touched his palm, a pillar of gray light shot through the roof of the office, piercing the clouds above Hogwarts. The 3 Hallows, the wand on the desk, the stone in his hand, and the cloak in his trunk, all hummed in a perfect, terrifying unison. The Master of Death, Dumbledore whispered, his voice full of awe and dread. There is no master, Harry said, slipping the ring onto his blackened finger. The stone didn't summon a ghost. It opened a door. There's only the gatekeeper. And I just found the keys. Harry walked toward the door, his presence so heavy that the gravity in the room felt doubled. One more thing, Albus, Harry said, stopping at the threshold. The Chamber of Secrets isn't a myth. It's a larder, and I'm going down there to kill the pet before it wakes up. Harry, the basilisk is. It's a snake, Albus. I've seen things in the gray that would make a basilisk look like a garden worm. Harry stepped out into the night, the blackened arm at his side, the stone on his hand glowing with a dull, eternal light. The harvest was accelerating. The school was no longer a sanctuary, it was a battlefield. And as the moon turned a bruised purple over the towers of Hogwarts, the dead began to rise from the black lake, standing on the water's surface, waiting for their king to give the word. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. The Architecture of Bone. The plumbing in Hogwarts didn't just carry water, it carried the echoes of every secret ever whispered in the dark. Harry stood in the second-floor girls' lavatory, the air thick with the smell of mildew and the stagnant, weeping sadness of Myrtle Warren. The ghost floated over a stall, her translucent face twisted in a pout. She stopped when she saw him. Most students ran from her tantrums. This boy looked like he was the reason tantrums were invented. You're the one, Myrtle whispered, her voice echoing off the cracked tiles. The one the other ghosts are talking about. The boy who smells like the basement of the world. Move, Myrtle, Harry said, his voice a gravelly rasp. I'm not here for the company. I'm here for the king of creeps. Harry walked to the copper tap with the tiny scratch of a snake on the side. He didn't speak Parseltongue with the hiss of a man imitating a serpent. He spoke it with the weight of the veil, a sound that vibrated the marrow in the walls. Open. The sink didn't just slide away, it shivered into the floor, revealing a dark, yawning gullet of a pipe that led straight into the bowels of the earth. Harry didn't look for a ladder. He stepped into the void, his cloak flaring out like the wings of a crow. He didn't slide, he drifted. Gravity was a suggestion he was increasingly inclined to ignore. The bottom was a charnel house. Thousands of small bones, rats, owls, things that had wandered too close, crunched under his boots. The air was heavy with the scent of ancient musk and the kin. Of rot that takes centuries to perfect. Harry walked through the tunnels, his staff casting a pale, sickly light that turned the damp walls into sweating skin. He reached the great door. Two emerald-eyed serpents entwined on a massive slab of stone. Speak to me, Slytherin, greatest of the Hogwarts Four, Harry hissed. The door groaned open. The Chamber of Secrets was a cathedral of ego. Massive, stone pillars carved with serpents rose into the darkness, and at the far end sat the gargantuan statue of Salazar Slytherin, a man who clearly had a god complex the size of a mountain. You're late, little bird, a voice echoed. Out of the shadows stepped a memory. It was Tom Riddle, 16 years old, his form more solid than a ghost but more ethereal than a man. He held Ginny Weasley's wand, his eyes bright with a cruel, adolescent hunger. At his feet, the girl lay unconscious, her life force bleeding out into the diary that sat on her chest like a lead weight. You, Harry said, his eyes scanning the chamber. The teenage years. This is the part of the soul that thought a diary was a good place to hide a secret. Tragic. Riddle's smile was a razor blade. I don't know who you are, boy. You wear Potter's face, but you have the eyes of a cold grave. No matter. The girl's life is almost mine, and when I return, I shall. You're not returning, Tom, Harry interrupted, walking toward the center of the hall. I've already eaten your future self. He was a coward who liked to hide in the back of turbans. You're just a footnote. Riddle's face contorted. Slytherin, hear my call. Kill the interloper. The mouth of the giant statue ground open. Slowly, heavily, the king of serpents slid out. The basilisk was a nightmare of green scales and ancient spite, 50 feet of muscle and venom that could kill with a glance. Its eyes were yellow suns of pure death. Harry didn't look away. The basilisk roared, a sound that shook the pillars. It locked eyes with Harry. Usually, this was the part where the victim turned into a corpse. Harry stared back. His green eyes flared with the light of the veil. The basilisk froze. Its head swayed, not in preparation to strike, but in confusion. It didn't see a prey animal. It saw a breach in the natural order. It saw the one thing in the world that was more dead than its own gaze. I am the gatekeeper, Harry whispered, his voice filling the chamber like a flood. And you, beast, Or a stray dog that's lived too long in the cellar. The basilisk lunged. Harry didn't move his staff. He didn't cast a shield. He simply raised his blackened, cursed hand, the one that carried the rod of Dumbledore's curse, and caught the snake's snout as it slammed into him. The impact should have shattered Harry's spine. Instead, the stone floor beneath him cracked as he absorbed the force. The necrotic energy in his arm flared, black veins pulsing with a violent, rhythmic light. My turn, Harry growled. He didn't use a sword. He used the veil. He ached into the basilisk's mind, a primitive, cold thing, and showed it the infinite silence. He showed it the place where all serpents go to shed their skins forever. The basilisk let out a muffled shriek. Its scales began to turn gray. The life force of the ancient creature was being siphoned directly into Harry's blackened arm, fueling the very curse that was supposed to kill the headmaster. Riddle. He watched in horror as his greatest weapon began to wither. What are you? This isn't magic. You're a monster. I'm the guy who pays the bills, Tom. Harry shouted over the roar of the dying snake. With a final, violent jerk, Harry ripped the soul out of the basilisk. The massive body slumped to the floor, a hollowed-out husk of scales and bone. Harry stood over it, his skin glowing with a terrifying, sickly radiance. He turned his gaze to Riddle. The memory boy was fading. He looked at the diary, then at Harry. The diary, Tom, Harry said, walking toward the unconscious Ginny. It's an anchor, and I'm pulling the boat in. Riddle screamed and lunged, trying to strike Harry with the stolen wand. Harry didn't even look. He caught the wand midair and snapped it like a dry twig. He reached down and picked up the diary. Please, Riddle whispered, his arrogance finally shattering. There's so much I can teach you, the secrets of the dark. I've heard them all, Harry said. He didn't use a basilisk fang. He simply pressed the resurrection stone, the ring on his finger, against the cover of the book. The Hallow and the Horcrux touched. It was a collision of pure life negation. A pill. Lar of black fire erupted from the diary. Riddle's scream was a high-pitched whistle that tore the air apart. The book disintegrated into ash, and the memory of Tom Riddle was dragged screaming into the stone. Trapped in the orbit of the very death he had tried to outrun. The chamber went silent. Harry collapsed next to Ginny. His blackened arm was smoking, the skin charred and cracking. He looked. At his hand, the stone was pulsing with a satisfied, deep hum. He reached out his healthy hand and touched Ginny's cheek. Wake up, kid, Harry muttered. The nightmare's over. The real one is just starting. Ginny's eyes fluttered open. She looked at Harry, then at the skeletal remains of the basilisk. She didn't scream. She just looked at Harry's glowing eyes and the darkness that seemed to roll off his skin like steam. You saved me, she whispered. Harry stood up, his movements stiff and pained. He looked at the ruined cathedral of Slytherin's ego. I saved the soul, Harry said, his voice a hollow echo. The girl was just in the way. He picked her up, her small frame light in his arms. As he walked toward the exit, the shadows of the chamber rose up to follow him, a royal guard of Dead escorting their master back to the light. Up in the school, the bells began to toll. Not for a celebration, but for a warning. The master of death was coming back up from the deep, and he was bringing the cold with him. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. The Funeral of Reason. The infirmary was a sanctuary of white linen and the smell of antiseptic, but it felt like a prison to a boy who had slept in the cradle of the void. Harry sat on the edge of the bed, his blackened arm resting on his lap like a piece of charred driftwood. Madame Pomfrey had tried to touch it once, the skin-to-skin contact had frozen her fingers so severely she'd had to submerge them in warming draft for an hour. Dumbledore stood by the window, the moonlight catching the silver of his beard. He looked at Ginny Weasley, who was sleeping in the adjacent bed. Her breathing deep and rhythmic for the first time in months. The Ministry is calling it a miracle, Harry, Dumbledore said, his voice heavy with a caution that bordered on dread. A monster slain. A girl returned. They want to give you an award. Cornelius Fudge is already drafting the press release. Harry let out a short, jagged laugh. Fudge is a tailor's dummy. He wants a hero to distract the public from the fact that the world is starting to tilt. Tell him to keep his medal. I don't collect gold, I collect debts. You took the diary, Dumbledore turned, his eyes narrowing. And you used the stone. I felt the pulse of it from the office, Harry. You are combining artifacts that were never meant to occupy the same space. The Hallows are not toys. The Hallows are tools, Albus. And the diary wasn't a toy, it was a leak. I plugged it. Harry stood up, his cloak drifting around his ankles like spilled ink. But we have a bigger problem than a dead snake and a shredded book. The Dementors are coming. Dumbledore stiffened. The Ministry has deployed them to guard the perimeter because of Sirius Black's escape. I protested, but they aren't here for Black, Harry interrupted. Walking toward the window, he looked out at the Great Lake. On the horizon, the air was blurring, turning into a gray, soul-sucking mist. They're here for the scent. They can smell the veil on me. They think I'm an open door. They're hungry, Albus, and they're tired of eating the scraps from Azkaban. The Black Lake, midnight. The Dementors didn't fly, they drifted like ash from a burnt world. There were hundreds of them, a localized eclipse that turned the summer night into a frozen wasteland. The lake began to glaze over with ice, the giant squid retreating into the crushing depths to escape the chill. On the shore stood Harry. Alone. He didn't have a wand. He had his staff, the white wood glowing with a faint, sickly violet light. The Dementors descended. The air was filled with the sound of their rattling, hollow breaths, the sound of a vacuum trying to fill itself with hope. To a normal wizard, this was the end of the line. The cold would seize the heart, the memories would turn to ash, and the kiss would follow. But Harry Potter didn't have happy memories for them to eat. He had the gray, he had the silence of the after. The lead Dementor, a towering horror with rotting bandages trailing behind it, lowered itself until its hooded face was inches from Harry's. It tilted its head, sensing the massive, swirling vortex of death energy within the boy. It didn't try to suck his soul out. It bowed. "You're out of your cage," Harry said, his American accent echoing across the frozen water. "Fudge told you to guard the walls. But you want the source, don't you? You want to go back to the void." The Dementors hissed, a sound like dry leaves skittering over a tombstone. They were the scavengers of the veil, the things that got left behind when the light moved on. They recognized Harry not as a victim, but as the shepherd. "Sirius Black is nearby," Harry commanded. "He's a fragment of the past I need to settle. Find him, bring him to me. Don't touch his soul. If you harm a single memory in his head, I will unmake you and feed your essence to the Styx." The Dementors shivered. The absolute authority in Harry's voice was backed by the stone on his finger. To them, he was the king of the pit. With a synchronized, terrifying motion, the 100-strong horde wheeled around and vanished into the forbidden forest, a tidal wave of despair hunting a man who was already broken. "You're playing a dangerous game, Harry." Harry turned. Remus Lupin stood on the path, his wand held loosely at his side. He looked haggard, his clothes patched and his eyes full of a weary, intellectual sorrow. "Professor Lupin," Harry acknowledged. "The werewolf. The man who spends his life apologizing for the moon." Lupin flinched. "I saw what you did just now. I've spent my life studying defense against the dark arts, but I've never seen anyone talk to them. You didn't even use a Patronus." "A Patronus is a lie, Remus. It's a bright light used to distract a predator. I don't need to distract them, I own them." Harry walked toward him, the frost cracking under his boots. "You were my father's friend. You smell like him, stale tobacco and wasted potential." Lupin's expression hardened. "James wasn't wasted potential. He died for you, and if he could see you now, commanding the guards of Azkaban like a dark lord in training, it would break his heart." Harry stopped. The air around him grew so cold that Lupin's wand began to glaze over. "My father died because he trusted the wrong people and played by the wrong rules. He thought life was a game of Quidditch. I know it's a game of chess played against a god who never loses. Don't lecture me on hearts, Remus. I've seen where they go when they stop beating." Before Lupin could respond, a scream tore through the forest. It was a human sound, raw, terrified, and desperate. The Dementors were returning. In the center of the swirling gray cloud, they dragged a man. He was skeletal, his hair a matted nest of filth, his prison rags hanging off his frame. Sirius Black. He was thrashing, but the Dementors held him with icy, unbreakable grips. They dropped him at Harry's feet. Sirius looked up, his gray eyes darting frantically. When he saw Harry, he froze. He didn't see the baby he'd lost. He saw a specter. "James," Sirius wheezed, his voice a ruined rasp. "No. You have Lily's eyes." "I have the eyes of the veil, Sirius," Harry said, looking down at his godfather. He felt a flicker of something, a ghost of an emotion, but he pushed it down into the dark. "You broke out of a fortress to kill a rat. That's a lot of effort for a pest control job." "He's here," Sirius shrieked, clutching at Harry's robes. "The rat, Peter, he's at the school. He betrayed them. I never." I would have died. I know, Harry said. He looked at the Dementors. Go. Return to the perimeter. If the minister asks, tell him you found nothing. The shadows drifted away, leaving the four of them, the boy, the werewolf, the prisoner. In the silent forest, in a pocket of unnatural stillness, Harry reached out his blackened hand and touched Sirius's forehead. Sirius gasped, the cold siphoning away the years of madness and the lingering effects of the Dementor's presence. It wasn't a healing spell, it was a clarity of the grave. Listen to me, Sirius, Harry said. The rat is in the Gryffindor dorms. Ron Weasley's pocket. I've known since the day I arrived. I was just waiting for the right moment to harvest him. Why wait? Lupin asked, stepping forward to help Sirius up. Because, Harry said, his eyes glowing with a terrifying, predatory light, Peter Pettigrew is a piece of the puzzle. He's the one who's going to lead me to the next anchor. He's the bridge to the Master Ghost. Harry turned toward the castle. The distant lights of Hogwarts looking like cold stars. The hunt is moving to the next stage, Harry announced. The Ministry wants a hero. The Dark Lord wants a body. I'm going to give them both a lesson in what happens when you try to cheat the grave. He looked at Sirius and Lupin. Follow me, and try to keep up. The living are always so slow when the end is in sight. As they walked toward the school, the shadows of the trees stretched out behind Harry, forming the shape of a massive, scythe-bearing figure that vanished the moment you looked at it directly. The king was coming home, and he was bringing his court with him. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. The Liturgy of Lies. The air in the shrieking shack didn't just howl, it screamed with the frequency of 1,000 unburied regrets. Harry stood in the center of the room, his presence making the rotted floorboards go silent, the dust motes freezing in midair as if the very atoms were afraid to move. Before him, the scene was a chaotic tableau of the living and the broken. Sirius Black, looking like a corpse reanimated by spite, held a trembling, middle-aged man by the throat. Peter Pettigrew was a mess of sweat and whimpers, his small, watery eyes darting toward the door. Remus Lupin stood guard, his wand shaking, not from fear of the rat, but from the cold radiating off the boy standing in the corner. Please, James wouldn't have killed me. Pettigrew wailed, his voice a shrill pipe. He would have shown mercy. James isn't here, Peter, Harry said. The American drawl was deeper now, vibrating with the resonance of the stone. And mercy is a concept for people who believe in tomorrow. I've seen your tomorrow. It's a very small, very dark room. Harry stepped forward. The shadows in the corners of the shack surged toward him, lengthening until they touched the hem of his robes. You sold a soul to a ghost, Harry continued, his blackened hand twitching. You traded a family for a seat at a table that was already being cleared. In the ledger of the Veil, that's a default on a high-interest loan. And I'm the collector. Harry, please, Lupin whispered. We need to take him to the castle. We need the truth to come out. Sirius's name needs to be cleared. Names are for tombstones, Remus, Harry said. He looked at Pettigrew. The rat isn't going to the castle. He's going to be a compass. Harry reached out. He didn't grab Pettigrew. He simply pointed his blackened index finger at the man's chest. A thin, ethereal cord of gray smoke erupted from Harry's fingertip and sank into Pettigrew's heart. The traitor's eyes rolled back. He didn't scream, he let out a long, wheezing hiss as the cord tightened. What are you doing to him? Sirius asked, his voice full of a ragged awe. I'm tethering him, Harry said. He's a Horcrux-adjacent soul. He's spent too much time near the rot. Now, wherever he goes, the Veil goes with him. He's going to lead us to the graveyard. He's going to lead us to the Father's bone. Suddenly, the door to the shack burst open. Severus Snape stood there, his face a mask of pale fury, his wand leveled at Sirius. Vengeance is sweet, Snape hissed, his eyes darting between Black and Lupin. I told Dumbledore you were helping him, Lupin. And now, I find you here with the boy, surrounded by... Snape stopped. He looked at Harry. He looked at the blackened, shriveled arm. He looked at the resurrection stone glowing on the boy's finger. The air in the room dropped another 10 degrees. Snape's breath came out in a thick, white cloud. Potter, Snape whispered, his bravado evaporating like mist. What have you done to your arm? I took Albus's debt, Severus, Harry said, turning his gaze toward the potion's master. The curse you couldn't stop. I ate it, because you're too busy nursing an old grudge to notice that the world is being dismantled around you. You are a child, Snape roared, though his hand was trembling. You are playing with Necrot. I see forces that will consume you before you reach manhood. I haven't been a child since the night the green light hit me, Harry said, walking toward Snape. The floorboards cracked under his feet, turning to gray ash. You want to protect Lily's son? Then stay out of the way of the Veil's work. The man who killed her is trying to crawl out of his grave, and you're worried about school rules and childhood rivals. Harry raised his staff. The white wood pulsed with a violet strobe. Sleep, Severus, Harry commanded. A wave of absolute silence hit Snape. The man didn't even have time to blink before his eyes glazed over and he slumped against the wall, unconscious, his mind plunged into a dreamless, cold void. Harry turned back to the others. Sirius, take the rat. Remus, watch the moon. It's almost time. Time for what? Sirius asked, clutching the tethered Pettigrew. The ritual, Harry said, looking out the window toward the forbidden forest. Riddle is tired of being a ghost. He's gathered his strength. He thinks he's going to use my blood to rebuild his flesh. He thinks he's found a loophole in the laws of life. Harry's eyes flared, the green light turning into a blinding, celestial white. I'm going to let him try, Harry whispered. I want him to have a body. It's so much easier to kill something when it has a heart to stop. The shack groaned as a massive wind hit it, a wind that didn't come from the sky, but from the earth itself. The Dementors were circling the building, their shadows dancing on the peeling wallpaper. Let's go, Harry said. The graveyard is calling, and I hate to keep a Dark Lord waiting for his funeral. He stepped through the door, and as he did, the shrieking shack fell into a total, absolute darkness, the very wood turning to dust behind him. The Master of Death was on the move, and the path he walked was paved with the souls of the unredeemed. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. The Bone, the Flesh, and the Reckoning. The Little Leaden Graveyard was a masterclass in Gothic decay. Headstones leaned like rotted teeth, and the fog didn't just sit on the ground, it felt like the breath of something that had been dead for a very long time. In the center of the gloom stood a massive stone cauldron, its contents simmering with a thick, oily luminescence that looked like liquid bile. Harry stood before the Riddle headstone. He wasn't bound by ropes or magic. He stood there by choice, his blackened arm hanging at his side, the resurrection stone on his finger pulsing in time with the heartbeat of the earth. Peter Pettigrew, his silver hand shaking so violently it rattled against his side, was sobbing. In his arms, he held a bundle of swaddling clothes that contained a shriveled, hairless horror, the rudimentary body of Lord Voldemort. Do it, Peter, the creature hissed, its voice like the scraping of a dry bone on a slate. The hour is at hand. The shepherd has brought himself to the slaughter. Harry looked at the creature with a detached, clinical boredom. You've got a lot of confidence for a guy who looks like a hairless cat, Tom. You really think a bit of soup is going to fix a shattered soul? More than soup, boy, Voldemort rasped. The alchemy of the ages. The deep magic. Pettigrew approached the cauldron. With a whimpering cry, he dropped the bundle into the liquid. Then, he moved to the grave of Thomas Riddle Sr. With a wave of his wand, the earth split. A bone, bleached white by decades of dirt, flew into the pot. Bone of the father, unknowingly given. Next, Pettigrew raised a jagged silver knife. He screamed as he hacked off his own right hand, the limb falling into the mixture with a sickening splash. Flesh of the servant, willingly given. Pettigrew staggered toward Harry, the knife dripping red. He reached for Harry's arm, the blackened, cursed one. Not that one, Pete, Harry drawled, his voice a low vibration that made the headstones shiver. That's death rot, you put that in your soup. And your boss is going to wake up as a pile of ash. Use the other one, the one that still has the sun in it. Harry offered his healthy arm, his expression mocking. Pettigrew slashed the skin, catching a few drops of blood in a vial before dumping them into the cauldron. Blood of the enemy, forcibly taken, you will resurrect your foe. The cauldron erupted. A pillar of white fire shot into the sky, so bright it turned the graveyard into a stark, colorless landscape of bone and shadow. From the center of the flames, a tall, skeletal figure rose. He was thin as a rail, his skin the color of a corpse. His eyes red slits that glowed with a predatory hunger. Lord Voldemort had returned. He stepped out of the cauldron, wrapping himself in a black robe provided by the cowering Pettigrew. He breathed in the air, his chest expanding with a jagged, rattling inhale. Finally, Voldemort whispered, looking at his long, pale fingers. The blood of the boy runs through me. The protection of the mother is broken. I can touch you now, Harry Potter. Voldemort reached out, his finger inches from Harry's face. Harry didn't move. He didn't even blink. You touched me the moment you made those horcruxes, Tom. You tied yourself to the veil. I'm not your enemy. I'm your inevitable conclusion. Voldemort's eyes narrowed. He sensed it then, the wrongness. The air around Harry wasn't just cold, it was empty. It was a vacuum that was slowly drinking the light of the graveyard. You have changed, boy, Voldemort said, his voice dropping to a hiss. The reports from the school, they said you were different. You carry the mark of the Peverells. You carry the stone. I carry the debt, Harry corrected. He raised his staff. You think you're a god because you cheated a natural law. But the veil doesn't lose, Tom. It just waits. You split your soul into 7. I've already eaten the diary and the diadem. The snake is a hollow shell. The ring is on my finger. Voldemort recoiled as if struck. A look of pure, unadulterated terror flickered across his snake-like face before being replaced by a mask of rage. Liar. You cannot destroy what I have hidden. I don't destroy, Harry said, stepping forward. The frost from his boots turned the grass to glass. I reclaim. I'm the audit you didn't prepare for. Voldemort snapped his wand out, the yew and phoenix feather. Avada Kedavra. The jet of green light slammed into Harry's chest. Pettigrew shrieked. The shadows of the graveyard seemed to pause. Harry didn't fall. He didn't even stumble. He caught the green light in his blackened hand. The necrotic energy of the killing curse swirling around his palm like a captured insect. He looked at the spell, then back at Voldemort. You're still using the same trick, Harry said, his voice echoing with the weight of 1,000 graves. The killing curse is a door, Tom. You're trying to throw a door at the guy who owns the house. Harry crushed the green light in his fist. My turn, Harry growled. He didn't use a wand. He slammed his staff into the ground. A shockwave of gray energy erupted, ripping through the graveyard. The spirits of the dead, the ones Voldemort had murdered to fuel his rise, didn't rise as ghosts. They rose as soldiers. 100 translucent, silent figures surrounded the Dark Lord. Cedric Diggory, the Potters, the old man from the village. They didn't speak, they just stared, their presence draining the heat from Voldemort's new body. You want to be a king? Harry asked, his eyes turning a blinding, radioactive white. Then rule the dead. They've been waiting for you. Voldemort screamed, a high-pitched sound of pure ego-shattering fear, and unleashed a torrent of fiendfire. The cursed flames roared, taking the shape of dragons and chimeras. Harry didn't flinch. He walked through the fire, the flames parting around his cloak as if they were afraid to touch the void. The harvest is almost over, Tom, Harry whispered, appearing inches from the Dark Lord's face. He reached out his blackened hand and grabbed Voldemort's throat. The contact was like liquid nitrogen. Voldemort's pale skin began to frost over, the very life force he had stolen being sucked back out of him and into the stone on Harry's finger. No, Voldemort wheezed, his red eyes bulging. I am eternal. Nothing is eternal, Harry said, except the silence. With a violent jerk, Harry threw Voldemort back against the riddle headstone. The Dark Lord slumped, his new body already beginning to fail, his connection to the physical plane fraying. Harry looked at the horizon. The sun was beginning to rise, but it didn't feel like morning. It felt like an ending. Go back to your holes, Harry commanded the spirits. The figures vanished. Harry looked down at the whimpering Pettigrew. Tell the others, Harry said, his voice a cold rasp. Tell the ones with the marks on their arms. The King of the Vale is here. And I'm not looking for followers. I'm looking for payment. Harry turned and walked away into the morning mist, the graveyard falling into a silence so deep that even the birds were afraid to sing. The return of the Dark Lord had been a triumph that lasted exactly 10 minutes. The Master of Death was just getting started. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. The Hegemony of the Hollow. The Ministry of Magic was a hive of frantic, bureaucratic panic. The fountain of magical brethren in the atrium didn't just trickle, it bled. The golden statues of the wizard, the centaur, and the goblin had been coated in a thin, crystalline layer of black frost that no fire could melt. Cornelius Fudge stood in the center of the lobby, his lime green bowler hat crushed in his hands. He was surrounded by aurors, their wands drawn and trembling. In front of them, leaning casually against the fountain, was Harry Potter. He wasn't the boy they had expected. He was a tall, gaunt specter draped in robes that seemed to be made of solidified smoke. His blackened arm was exposed, the dead skin pulsing with a rhythmic, violet glow that hummed in the silent hall. You can't just walk in here, Potter. Fudge shrieked, his voice cracking. This is the seat of our government. You've brought the Dementors to our doors. You've desecrated the graveyard. Harry looked at Fudge, his eyes two emerald voids that saw through the man's skin to the shivering, mediocre soul beneath. Government is a hobby for people who think they control their own expiration dates, Cornelius. I didn't come for your laws. I came for the locket. The what? Fudge stammered. The locket, Harry repeated, his American drawl echoing with the weight of a closing tomb. It's in the desk of a woman named Umbridge. She thinks it's a pretty trinket. I know it's a cancer. A woman. N with a face like a pale toad stepped forward from the crowd. Dolores Umbridge, dressed in a shade of pink that looked like a scream in the middle of a funeral, clutched a heavy gold locket at her throat. This is a family heirloom. You foul little brat, she spat, her voice a sickly sweet poison. You are a danger to society. You belong in Azkaban with the rest of the freaks. Harry didn't move. He didn't even raise his staff. He simply exhaled. The temperature in the atrium plummeted. The water in the fountain turned to black ice, shattering the statues into 1,000 jagged shards. The Aurors, wands frosted over, sticking to their palms. I am the place where Azkaban was born, Dolores, Harry said, his voice dropping into a register that made the floorboards groan. You're wearing a piece of a dead man's ego. It's eating you, and you're too arrogant to feel the rot. Harry took a step. The marble floor beneath his boots didn't just crack, it dissolved into gray ash. Kill him, Umbridge screamed at the Aurors. He's a dark wizard. Subdue him. The Aurors hesitated. They had faced Death Eaters. They had faced giants. But Harry Potter didn't feel like a wizard. He felt like a law of physics. He felt like the end of the world. One Auror, younger and braver than the rest, fired a stupefy. The red bolt of light hit Harry's chest and simply vanished. It didn't bounce off, it was absorbed. Like a drop of water in a desert. Harry reached out his healthy hand. A lash of pure, shadow matter erupted from his palm, wrapping around Umbridge's throat. He didn't pull her to him, he pulled the space between them. In a blink, she was inches from his face. The locket, Harry whispered. He reached out his blackened, cursed hand and touched the gold. The Horcrux inside, the soul of Tom Riddle, screamed. The locket burned white-hot against Umbridge's skin, but Harry didn't let go. He closed his fist around the jewelry and pulled. A gout of black, oily smoke was ripped from the locket. It formed a jagged, screaming face that tried to bite the air, but Harry's hand was a vacuum. He inhaled the smoke, his eyes flaring with a blinding, necrotic white light. His skin turned translucent for a second, showing the black veins of the curse spreading even further up his neck. Umbridge slumped to the floor, her pink robes scorched, her mind shattered by the proximity to the veil. Harry stood over her, the locket now a dull, empty piece of tin in his hand. He dropped it. It made a hollow, tinny sound against the marble. That's for, Harry said to the silent room. Fudge backed away, tripping over his own feet. You're a monster. You're worse than him. No, Harry said, turning to look at the crowd of terrified officials. He wanted to rule you. I just want to finish the job. You've spent centuries hiding behind wands and rituals, pretending you can keep the dark at bay. But the dark isn't an enemy. It's the destination. Harry raised his staff, the elder stick's wood vibrating. The ministry is closed, Harry announced. Go home, hug your children, pray to whatever gods you think are listening. Because the veil is tired of waiting, and I'm the one who decides who stays and who goes. With a violent slam of his staff, a shockwave of gray mist exploded outward. It didn't hurt anyone, but it stripped the magic from the room. The lights went out, the elevators stopped, the portraits of past ministers went silent and blank. Harry walked toward the exit, his cloak billowing in a wind that came from nowhere. As he passed the Aurors, they lowered their wands. Not because they were surrendered, but because they felt, for the first time in their lives, that magic was a very small thing in a very large universe. Outside, the London sky was a bruised purple. The Dementors were no longer hovering. They were standing on the rooftops, thousands of them, waiting for their king. Harry looked up at them. To the cave, Harry commanded. The cup and the locket were easy. But the locket in the sea, that one is going to be a bloodbath. He vanished into the shadows, leaving the heart of the wizarding world in total, absolute darkness. The Master of Death was no longer hiding in a school. He was taking the world back, one soul at a time. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9. The Cave of Salt and Silence. The North Sea didn't just roar, it screamed against the jagged cliffs of the coast, a relentless, churning maw of gray water and ancient cold. Harry stood on the precipice, his cloak whipping around him like the wings of a dying god. Below, the entrance to the cave was a black slit in the rock. visible only when the tide retreated like a bared tooth. He didn't need a boat. He stepped off the cliff. He descended through the spray, his boots touching the surface of the water without breaking it. The ocean didn't dare swallow him, it flattened beneath his feet, turning to a dark, glassy road that led into the throat of the cavern. The air inside smelled of salt, old copper, and the static of a high-voltage curse. Dumbledore had once told him that magic always leaves traces. Here, the magic didn't just leave a trace, it had built a fortress of spite. Harry walked through the fissure, his staff's violet light reflecting off walls of slick, wet obsidian. He reached the edge of a massive underground lake, the water as still as a mirror made of ink. In the center sat a small island of white stone, glowing with a sickly, phosphorescent light. "The Inferi," Harry whispered, his voice vibrating the damp air. Tom always did love a captive audience. Beneath the surface of the lake, thousands of pale, translucent bodies shifted. They weren't ghosts, they were the hollowed-out husks of the discarded, animated by a dark intent that mimicked life. To them, the scent of the living was a dinner bell. Harry stepped onto the water. Immediately, the surface broke. Skeletal hands, slick with slime and rot, erupted from the depths, clawing at his ankles. The Inferi rose like a tide of bone, their milky, sightless eyes fixed on the boy. They didn't growl, they made a sound like dry parchment tearing. "Back," Harry commanded. The Inferi didn't flinch, they weren't sentient enough to feel the weight of the veil. They were just puppets, and their strings were pulled by a dead man's fear. Harry didn't use fire, he didn't use light, he slammed the base of his staff into the water. A pulse of pure, concentrated absence rippled outward. It wasn't an explosion, it was a cancellation. The magic animating the corpses simply ceased to be. The Inferi didn't die, they were unmade. Their bodies dissolved into gray silt, the light in their eyes snuffed out as if a candle had been dropped into a well. The thousands of hands reached one last time and then sank, returning to the silt of the lake bed. Harry reached the island. In the center sat a stone basin filled with a clear, shimmering emerald potion. At the bottom lay a gold locket, the real one, the one Regulus Black had died to replace. And the one Voldemort had hidden with a ritual of pure, unadulterated suffering. The potion was a toxin for the soul. It required the drinker to experience every eddy of their life on loop until their mind shattered. Harry looked at the liquid. He didn't pick up the crystal goblet. He reached out his blackened, cursed hand and dipped his fingers into the emerald brew. The potion hissed. The island began to shake as the curse within the liquid tried to invade Harry's mind. It showed him the gray. It showed him the silence. It tried to make him feel the loneliness of the veil. Harry laughed. It was a hollow, echoing sound that cracked the basin. "You're trying to drown a man in a cup of water he's already drunk," Harry said. He didn't drink the potion. He absorbed it. The emerald liquid flowed into his blackened skin, turning his veins a glowing, toxic green. His eyes flared, the pupils vanishing into a sea of white light. He felt the pain, the despair, the absolute hopelessness of 1,000 lost souls, and he fed it all to the stone. The basin emptied. The locket lay exposed, vibrating with a high-pitched, metallic whine. Harry picked it up. This wasn't the fake. This was the piece of Tom Riddle that held his most primal, serpentine malice. "Harry Potter," the locket hissed, the voice coming from the air itself. "You are a hollow shell. Sir. Vant of a master who doesn't care for you. Give me your hand. Let me fill the void." "The void is already full, Tom," Harry said, his voice overlapping with the whispers of the veil. "It's full of people like you." Harry didn't inhale this one. He didn't have to. He squeezed the locket in his blackened hand, and the necrotic rod of Dumbledore's curse, the very thing meant to kill, surged into the gold. The locket didn't just break. It rotted. The gold turned to black ash, and the soul fragment within was crushed into a single, dense point of darkness before being winked out of existence. 5, Harry said. He stood on the island. The toxic green light in his veins slowly fading back into the bruised purple of his usual aura. He looked around the cavern, the silence returning, heavier than before. "The cup is in the vault," Harry muttered to the darkness. "The snake is with the ghost." And then, the final piece. He looked at his own reflection in the still water of the lake. He didn't see a boy. He saw a bridge. He saw a man who was becoming more shadow than flesh with every anchor he reclaimed. "Harry," a voice echoed from the entrance of the cave. It was Hermione. She stood at the threshold, her wand lit, her face pale with a terror she couldn't name. She had followed him, navigated the cliffs, and braved the salt spray. You shouldn't be here, Hermione, Harry said, not turning around. The air here is for the dead. I'm not leaving you, Harry. She shouted, her voice trembling. I've seen what's happening. You're fading. Every time you take one of those things, a part of you doesn't come back. You're not just stopping him, you're becoming the end of everything. Harry finally turned. The light of his staff caught his face, making him look like a marble statue carved by a madman. Everything has an end, Hermione. That's the only thing that makes it beautiful. You want to save me. Save yourself. Get as far away from me as you can. No, she said, stepping onto the water, her own magic flaring to keep her afloat. I've been reading the Peverell legend. The Master of Death doesn't rule the world, Harry. He reconciles it. You're not an executioner. You're a shepherd. Harry looked at her, and for a fleeting second, the green in his eyes softened. The boy who lived in the cupboard under the stairs flickered behind the mask of the Reaper. Then walk with the shepherd, Hermione, Harry said, extending his healthy hand, but don't complain about the cold. As she took his hand, the cave collapsed. Not into rock and rubble, but into shadow. They vanished from the coast, leaving only the sound of the ocean, which continued to scream at a world that was no longer the same. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. The Vault of Avarice. Gringotts Bank didn't sit on the earth, it sat on a hoard of ancient subterranean greed. The white marble halls usually buzzed with the scratch of goblin quills, but as Harry stepped through the bronze doors, the atmosphere turned to lead. The goblins at their high desks froze. They didn't see a wizard. They saw a sovereign. Hermione walked half a step behind him, her wand gripped so tight her knuckles were white. The air around Harry was shimmering with a distorted heat, a side effect of the 5 soul fragments he had already processed. He wasn't just walking, he was a walking breach in the containment of the afterlife. Griphook, Harry said, his voice a low-frequency hum that made the scales on the desks rattle. A senior goblin looked up, his sharp eyes narrowing. Mr. Potter, you have no appointment, and you are, significantly more than you were. The Lestrange Vault, Harry said, ignoring the formalities. Now, or I'll let the Dementors in to do the banking for me. Griphook didn't argue. He saw the resurrection stone on Harry's finger. And he saw the blackened, necrotic arm that seemed to pull the light out of the room. He stepped down from his stool and gestured toward the carts. The descent into the depths of London was a blur of stalactites and freezing wind. They passed the dragon, a pale, blind creature chained to the floor of the deepest level. As Harry's cart slowed, the dragon roared, a blast of fire that singed the damp walls. Harry didn't flinch. He stepped out of the cart and looked at the beast. You've been a slave to gold for too long, Harry whispered. He reached out his blackened hand. The dragon, a monster of pure rage, suddenly whimpered. It lowered its massive head, pressing its snout into the frost-covered stone at Harry's feet. Go, Harry commanded, with a snap of his fingers. The goblin-wrought chains turned to dust. The dragon didn't attack. It turned and crawled into the darkness of the tunnels, fleeing the presence of something it feared more than fire. The vault, Harry said, turning back to the heavy gold door. Griphook placed a hand on the metal. The door melted away, revealing a mountain of gold that was cursed with the Gemino and Flagranti charms. Anything touched would multiply and burn. Don't touch a single coin, Hermione, Harry warned. He walked into the mountain of treasure. The gold sizzled as he passed, the heat of the curse trying to ignite his robes. But the shadows draped around him swallowed the flames. High on a shelf, nestled in a pile of chalices, sat Hufflepuff's cup. It was beautiful, etched with the badger of the Earth House, but it felt like a cold, wet tooth in the back of a skull. Harry reached for it. Harry Potter, the cup whispered. The boy of nothing, the boy of the veil. Your friends will die in the cold you bring. You are the poison in the well. Harry's hand closed around the handle. The gold erupted. Thousands of fake cups and coins began to pour from the walls, drowning the floor in a red-hot, crushing tide of metal. Hermione yelled, casting a shield charm that buckled under the weight of the multiplying treasure. Harry didn't cast a spell. He looked at the cup in his hand and let out a breath of pure, concentrated gray mist. I am the well, Tom, Harry growled. The necrotic energy in his arm surged into the cup. The gold didn't just melt, it screamed. A high-pitched, metallic shriek tore through the vault as the soul fragment was boiled alive in its own vessel. The multiplying gold stopped. The heat vanished. The mountain of treasure turned to dull, gray lead. Harry crushed the cup into a shapeless lump of metal and dropped it. 6. Harry said, his voice sounding like two stones grinding together. He turned to the exit, his skin now so pale it looked like frost-covered glass. The black veins of the curse had reached his jawline, etching a map of the grave into his face. "Harry, look at you," Hermione whispered, her voice trembling. You're breaking. The vessel has to break for the contents to be poured out." "Hermione," Harry said, walking past her. "The snake is next. And then, we go to the graveyard of my beginning." He stepped out of the vault, and as he did, the gold behind him dissolved into ash. The Master of Death had no use for currency. He only dealt in souls. End of Chapter 10. Chapter 11. The Serpent's Vigil. The air at Hogwarts didn't just feel cold anymore, it felt thin. As if the castle were being uncoupled from the physical world. The student body had been evacuated to the Great Hall, a sea of terrified faces watching the windows as the sky turned the color of a fresh bruise. Outside, the Dementors had formed a literal wall of shadow, a silent, swirling cyclone that blocked out the stars. Harry walked through the corridors, his staff, the Elder Styx branch, leaving a trail of hoarfrost on the stone. He wasn't heading for the Great Hall. He was heading for the North Tower. Nagini was waiting for him. The snake was no longer a mere animal. Voldemort, sensing the systematic destruction of his anchors, had placed the final piece of his soul into the beast and encased her in a shimmering, translucent sphere of protective magic. She lay coiled in the center of the divination classroom, her scales reflecting the sickly violet light of the storm outside. Beside her stood the ghost of Tom Riddle, the Master Ghost, the main fragment that had fled the graveyard. He was no longer skeletal. He looked like a blur of static, a glitch in reality, his red eyes burning with a desperate, cornered madness. "You've come for the last one," Voldemort's voice hissed, echoing from the walls. "The floor, and the very air. You've eaten my past, you've burned my treasures, but you cannot touch the serpent. She is protected by a cage of absolute rejection." Harry stopped at the threshold. He looked at the sphere. It was a masterpiece of dark arts, a shield built on the concept of noli me tangere. To touch it was to be erased. "I don't need to touch her, Tom," Harry said. His American drawl was gone, replaced by a voice that sounded like a tectonic plate shifting. "The snake isn't a Horcrux anymore. She's a leak, and the veil is thirsty." Harry didn't raise his staff. He didn't draw a wand. He reached up and pulled back the sleeve of his robe, revealing the blackened arm. The rot had reached his neck now, a jagged black collar of dead skin that pulsed with a rhythmic, white-hot light. "You used the blood of the enemy to come back," Harry said, walking toward the sphere. "You took my blood, you took the tether, you thought it would protect you from me. But you forgot one thing." Harry stopped inches from the shield. "My blood doesn't belong to the sun anymore." Harry slammed his blackened palm against the protective sphere. The room screamed. The absolute rejection magic of the shield clashed with the absolute reclamation of the veil. Sparks of black and gold fire erupted, melting the crystal balls on the shelves and shattering the teacups. Voldemort lunged forward, his spectral hands clawing at Harry's throat. "Get away from her. I will unmake you." Harry didn't even look at the ghost. He let Voldemort's spectral hands sink into his chest. The Dark Lord shrieked as he realized his mistake. He wasn't touching a boy, he was touching an open door. The cold of the veil began to pull the main soul fragment into Harry's body, phoning the ghost's energy to fuel the breach. "I am the master of the Hallows, Tom," Harry growled, his eyes turning into twin suns of necrotic light. "The wand is in the office. The cloak is on my back. And the stone is on my hand. You're not fighting a wizard. You're fighting the inevitable." With a final, violent surge of power, Harry's blackened hand punched through the shield. The sphere shattered like glass. Nagini reared up, her fangs bared, a hiss of pure malice escaping her throat. But she didn't strike. She couldn't. The moment the shield broke, the resurrection stone flared. Harry grabbed the snake by the neck. The soul fragment inside Nagini, the seventh piece, tried to fight. It tried to flood Harry's mind with the memories of the forest, the hunger, the kill. But Harry's mind was a graveyard, and there was plenty of room for one more body. He didn't use a sword. He didn't use venom. He simply squeezed. The necrotic rot from his arm flowed into the serpent's scales. Nagini's body didn't just die. It turned to stone, petrified by the sheer weight of the transition. The soul fragment was ripped out in a gout of black, oily smoke that Harry inhaled with a jagged, bone-deep shudder. The snake crumbled into gray dust. 7. Harry wheezed. The master ghost of Voldemort let out a sound that wasn't human. It was the sound of a god realizing he was mortal. The spectral form of the Dark Lord began to unravel. His features blurring as the anchors that held him to the world were finally gone. "It's not over," Voldemort shrieked, his voice fading into a whistle. "I still have the blood. I am still tethered to you." "No, Tom," Harry said, standing up amongst the dust of the final Horcrux. The black veins on his face were glowing now, a map of the end times. "You're tethered to the veil. And I'm the one who decides when to pull the cord." Harry reached out and grabbed the air where Voldemort's heart would have been. He didn't pull the ghost toward him, he pushed the world away. With a sound like a thunderclap, Voldemort was blasted backward, out of the tower and into the night sky. The Dementors outside didn't attack him. They surrounded him, 1,000-strong SW. Arm of shadows that began to tear at the fading ghost, dragging him toward the center of the cyclone. Harry walked to the edge of the shattered window. He watched as the most feared Dark Lord in Histo, Rye, was reduced to a screaming wisp of smoke, being pulled into the heart of the Dementor hive. "He's yours," Harry commanded. The cyclone collapsed. The Dementors vanished, dragging the screaming soul of Tom Riddle back to the gray, not as a king, not as a master, but as a prisoner of the infinite silence. Harry stood alone in the ruins of the tower. He looked at his hand. The resurrection stone was cracked. The Elder Stick's staff was turning to ash in his grip. The job was done. The balance was restored, but as Harry looked at his reflection in a piece of broken glass, he saw that the black rot had finally reached his heart. His skin was turning to smoke. His eyes were fading. "Harry," he turned. Dumbledore stood at the door, his own healthy hand trembling as he looked at the boy who had saved the world by becoming its end. "It's over, Albus," Harry said, his voice a mere whisper of wind. "At what cost, my boy?" Harry looked out at the sunrise, the first real sun he had seen in what felt like 1,000 years. It was beautiful, it was warm, and he couldn't feel it. "The cost was always the same," Harry said, his body beginning to dissolve into gray mist. "Life is a loan. I just paid the interest." He took one step toward the light and vanished, leaving only a pile of ash and a cracked black stone on the floor. End of Chapter 11. Chapter 12. The Purgatory of the Pure. The world didn't end with a bang. And it didn't end with a whimper. It ended with a transition. Harry opened his eyes, but eyes was a generous term for the sensory perception he now possessed. He wasn't at Hogwarts. He wasn't in the graveyard. He was standing in a version of King's Cross Station that had been scrubbed of every stain, every person, and every train. It was a cathedral of white marble and infinite, silent tracks, stretching into a horizon where the sky was the color of a fading memory. He looked down at his hands. They weren't blackened anymore. They weren't scarred. They were pale and perfect, but they were also translucent. He was wearing the cloak of invisibility, but it wasn't a garment, it was woven into his very essence. "You're early," a voice echoed. Harry turned. Sitting on a bench made of solidified light was a figure that looked remarkably like Albus Dumbledore, but younger, his robes white and untarnished by the soot of a long, complicated life. "I'm not early, Albus," Harry said, his voice no longer a rasp, but a clear, resonant tone that didn't need air to travel. "I'm exactly where I was always going. The station between the breath and the bone. The seventh Horcrux," the figure of Dumbledore said. Standing up, he looked at Harry with a profound, paternal sadness. "When you took the soul of the serpent, you became the final vessel. You processed so much death had your own life became a minority shareholder in your body. I didn't just process it," Harry said, walking toward the tracks. "I reclaimed it." Tom thought he was building a kingdom. He was just building a pile of debt. "I cleared the books, and in doing so, you have become something the universe hasn't seen in an age," Dumbledore said, gesturing to the tracks. "A master of death who actually understands the job description. Most who seek the Hallows want to stay. You used them to leave." Suddenly, a sound broke the silence. It was the sound of a small, wounded animal. Harry looked under a nearby bench. There lay the fragment of Voldemort that had been inside him, the piece he had inhaled when he was a child, and the piece he had reclaimed from the snake. It was a raw, flayed thing, daring in the cold light of the station. It was too small to be a man, too broken to be a ghost. "Can I fix it?" Harry asked. "No," Dumbledore whispered. "There's no medicine for a soul that has been shredded by its own hand. It will stay here, in the gap, until the end of time itself. It is the only thing that cannot move on." Harry knelt beside the creature. He didn't feel pity. He didn't feel hate. He felt the cold, clinical duty of the gatekeeper. He reached out and touched the flayed thing. The creature hissed, but then, for a brief second, it went still. "You're done, Tom," Harry whispered. "The silence is yours now." Harry stood up and looked back at the station. Far off in the distance, he could see them. Not as people, but as lights. Ron, Hermione, Ginny, Neville. They were moving on with their lives. The war was over. The frost was melting. The world was beginning to breathe again because he had stopped. "They'll remember you as a hero," Dumbledore said. "I don't want to be a hero," Harry said, turning toward a train that was manifesting out of the mist. It was a train made of shadows and silver, its engine humming with the heartbeat of the Vale. "I want to be the Rizzo. And they don't have to be afraid of the dark." The train doors opened. A figure stood in the doorway, a woman with long, dark hair and eyes that matched the green of the world Harry had left behind. Bessie. To her was a man with messy hair and glasses, his hand resting on her shoulder. James and Lily. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The love radiating from them was a physical heat that Harry hadn't felt in a decade. It was the only thing the Vale couldn't touch. "Is it time?" Harry asked. "That's the beauty of it, Harry," Dumbledore said, fading into the white light of the station. "It's always time, and it's never too late." Harry stepped toward the train. But as his foot touched the metal grate, the station shook. A violent, jagged tear appeared in the white sky. The Vale was screaming. Back in the physical world, in the ruins of the North Tower, something was wrong. The resurrection stone, cracked and discarded on the floor, began to glow with a frantic, rhythmic red light. The magic Harry had unleashed hadn't just settled, it had left a vacuum. And nature, especially the nature of the dark arts, abhors a vacuum. "Harry," Lily's voice echoed, sharp with alarm. Harry looked back. The station was dissolving. The white marble was turning back into the gray, petrified stone of the afterlife. The train was flickering. The debt wasn't fully paid, Harry realized, his eyes widening. Tom was the anchor, but the idea of him, the cult of the dark, it's still there. The followers, the Malfoys, the Carrows, they're trying to pull him back. They're using the stone. "You can't go back, Harry," James said, his voice a ghost of a roar. "If you go back now, you won't be a boy. You'll be a wraith." Harry looked at his parents, then at the tear in the sky. He saw the world he had just saved. And he saw the shadow of a new war rising from the ashes of the old one. He saw the people who would die if the gatekeeper wasn't there to hold the line. "I'm not going back as a boy," Harry said, his voice hardening into the legendary tone of the Reaper. "I'm going back as the law." He turned away from the train. He turned away from the light. With a scream of pure, unadulterated willpower, Harry Potter dived into the tear in the sky, falling out of purgatory and back into the cold, screaming reality of a world that wasn't finished with him yet. He hit the floor of the North Tower like a meteor of shadow. The resurrection stone flew into his hand, mending itself instantly. The Elder Stick's staff regrew from the ash. Harry stood up, his skin no longer translucent, but a solid, matte black. His eyes were no longer green, they were the absolute, terrifying white of a dying star. The Master of Death was no longer a title. It was a transformation. He walked to the window and looked out at the sunrise. It wasn't enough. The survivors were being rounded up by the remaining Death Eaters in the courtyard below. Lucius Malfoy was shouting orders. Bellatrix Lestrange was laughing, her wand sparking with cruciatous fire. They thought the king was dead. Harry stepped out of the window and didn't fall. He descended like a slow-moving executioner. "The audit," Harry's voice boomed, shaking the very stones of Hogwarts, "is not over." End of Chapter 12. Chapter 13. The Harvest of the Hallows. The courtyard of Hogwarts was a jagged mosaic of rubble and desperation. The dust of the battle hadn't settled. It hung in the air like powdered bone. Lucius Malfoy stood over a group of kneeling students, his face a mask of aristocratic terror masked by a thin veneer of cruelty. Beside him, Bellatrix Lestrange was a dervish of manic energy, her wand tracing jagged, red sparks in the air as she looked for someone, anyone, to punish for her master's disappearance. "He is gone," Bellatrix shrieked, her voice cracking the silence. "The Dark Lord has ascended. And you pathetic dregs, you will be the foundation of the new world." She raised her wand toward Neville Longbottom, who was beaten, bloodied, but still staring at her with a defiance that belonged to a king. Crucio. The red bolt never left her wand. The air in the courtyard didn't just get cold, it ceased to be air. It became a pressurized vacuum that sucked the breath from the lungs of every living soul. The sun, which had been peeking over the horizon, was suddenly blotted out, not by a cloud, but by a localized eclipse of absolute shadow. From the sky, a figure descended. He didn't fly, he didn't hover. He simply stepped down through the dimensions as if the atmosphere were a flight of stairs. Harry Potter hit the center of the courtyard with a sound like a mountain collapsing. He was no longer a boy in a school uniform. He was a nightmare draped in the master's shroud. His skin was the color of midnight marble, and his eyes were twin voids of burning, white-hot entropy. The elder stick's staff in his hand wasn't wood anymore, it was a spine of pure obsidian that hummed with the frequency of 1,000 screaming souls. Bellatrix, Harry said. The name didn't travel through the air. It vibrated inside the teeth of everyone present. Bellatrix spun around, her eyes wide with a mix of religious awe and animalistic fear. Potter, you are dead. The master claimed you. The master is a tenant in my basement. Bellatrix, Harry said, taking a step toward her. The stone beneath his feet didn't crack, it turned to liquid shadow, rippling outward like a dark pond. And I've come to collect the back rent. Kill him, Lucius screamed, his voice hitting a high, feminine pitch. All of you, kill him now. The remaining Death Eaters, the Carrows, McNair, Dolohov, all unleashed a torrent of killing curses. A dozen jets of green light converged on Harry from every angle. Harry didn't move, he didn't cast a shield. The green light hit him and was simply integrated. He absorbed the energy of the death spells as if they were nothing more than a light breeze. The white voids of his eyes flared brighter with every curse he swallowed. My turn, Harry whispered. He slammed the obsidian staff into the ground. He didn't use a spell from a book. He used the law of the veil. The shadows of the Death Eaters suddenly detached from their feet. These weren't the playful shadows of a sunny day, they were the literal weight of their sins. The shadows rose up, forming clawed, skeletal hands that grabbed their owners by the throat. The courtyard became a symphony of choking and frantic, muffled screams. The Death Eaters were being strangled by their own darkness. You think you know the dark? Harry asked, walking through the carnage as if he were strolling through a garden. He stopped in front of Lucius Malfoy. You use the dark as a cloak to hide your cowardice. You used it to bully the weak and to hoard your gold. But the dark isn't a tool, Lucius. It's a debt. Harry reached out and touched Lucius's chest with his palm. Payment is due, Harry growled. The dark mark on Lucius's arm began to burn, not with fire, but with a cold that turned his blood to slush. The ink of the tattoo began to spread, crawling up his neck and over his face like a swarm of black spiders. Lucius let out a strangled whimper before his eyes rolled back, his soul being pulled into the stone on Harry's finger. He didn't die, he became a hollowed-out statue of salt and regret, frozen in a silent scream. Bellatrix let out a guttural roar and lunged at Harry with a silver dagger. I will carve your heart out for the Lord. Harry caught her wrist. The contact made her skin sizzle and turn gray. Your Lord is a fragment in a station that doesn't exist, Harry said, looking deep into her madness. He doesn't want you. He's afraid of you, because you reminded him of what it's like to be human, and he hated you for it. Harry didn't kill her, he simply whispered a word in the language of the grave. Bellatrix's eyes went blank, her mind, already fractured, was plunged into a loop of every moment of pain she had ever inflicted on others, magnified by the weight of the veil. She fell to her knees, her laughter turning into a hollow, rhythmic sobbing that would never stop. The students and teachers watched in a paralyzed silence. This wasn't the victory they had dreamed of. This wasn't the boy who lived, saving the day. This was a god of the underworld conducting an execution. Hermione stepped forward, her face streaked with dirt and tears. Harry, stop. It's over. They're defeated. Harry turned his white gaze toward her. For a moment, the shadow around him flickered, and she saw the bow. Why again? The lonely kid who had been claimed by the dark. It's never over, Hermione, Harry said, his voice softening just enough to break her heart. The war of the living is a cycle. I'm breaking the gears. If I leave them here, they will just wait for the next ghost to follow. I am taking the seeds of the rot with me. He raised his staff high. The resurrection stone pulsed with a final, blinding strobe of violet light. Every soul marked by the snake, Harry commanded, return to the source. Across the grounds, across the country, and deep within the cells of Azkaban, every man and woman who carried the dark mark felt a sudden, absolute silence. Their hearts didn't stop, they were simply deleted from the ledger of the living. One by one, the Death Eaters in the courtyard vanished. They didn't leave bodies. They turned into pillars of gray ash that were carried away by a wind that blew from the direction of the afterlife. The courtyard was suddenly empty of enemies. Only the victims and the survivors remained. Harry stood in the center of the ruins, his power receding, the matte black skin fading back to a pale, sickly translucent. He looked at the Elder Stick's staff, it was cracking. The stone on his finger was dulling. The Master of Death was a title that required a heavy tax on the vessel. "Harry," Ginny Weasley called out, moving toward him. "Stay back," Harry warned, his voice cracking. "The tether is fraying. I can't stay in the sun for long." He looked at Dumbledore's ghost, which was standing near the entrance to the Great Hall. The old man nodded, a final, silent acknowledgement of a job done with a brutal, terrifying perfection. "The world is yours again," Harry said to the survivors. "Keep it clean, because I won't be coming back to sweep the floors a second time." Harry turned and walked toward the Great Lake. As he moved, the Dementors gathered around him, not as predators, but as a royal guard. They formed a dark corridor that led straight to the water's edge. Harry stepped onto the surface of the lake. He didn't look back. He walked until he reached the center, where the water was deepest and the shadows were thickest. He raised his hand. The cloak of invisibility draped over him. The stone flared one last time. The staff shattered into a million pieces of starlight. Harry Potter sank beneath the surface of the water, not as a boy who had drowned, but as a king who had finished his tour of duty. The eclipse ended. The sun finally hit the courtyard, warm and golden. The birds began to sing. But as the survivors looked at the empty space where the boy who lived had stood, they knew that the world was no longer under the protection of a hero. It was under the watch of the Veil. End of Chapter 13. Chapter 14. The Silence of the Sepulchre. The world moved on, but it moved with a limp. The wizarding world didn't celebrate the fall of Voldemort with fireworks and lemon drops this time. They celebrated with hushed tones and a lingering, bone-deep shudder. Hogwarts was rebuilt, stone by stone, but the North Tower remained a blackened jagged tooth against the sky, unrepaired by any charm. No one dared to touch it. The air there didn't just feel cold, it felt final. But the Veil doesn't understand, happily ever after. Deep beneath the Black Lake, in the crushing pressure where the light of the sun is a myth, Harry didn't sleep. He sat on a throne of shipwrecks and ancient silt. He wasn't breathing, but he was listening. He was the ear of the world. He heard the dying breath of every creature in the Forbidden Forest. He felt the heartbeat of every student in the dormitories above. He was the anchor keeping the two worlds from colliding. But anchors eventually rust. "You're holding on too tight, little king," a voice rasped through the water. Harry didn't turn his head. His eyes, now permanently glowing with a soft, radioactive violet, tracked the movement of the shadows. Thanatos, or the entity that had taken that name, drifted through the water as if it were air. Its silver mask was cracked now, reflecting the toll of the war Harry had waged. "The balance is still fragile," Harry said. His voice didn't move the water, it moved the mind. "The Ministry is already trying to weaponize the Potter event. They're looking for the stone. They're digging up the graveyard at Little Hangleton, hoping to find a scrap of the power I used." "Let them dig," Thanatos hissed. "They are children playing with the ashes of a son. But you are becoming a ghost while your heart still has blood in it. That's a paradox the Veil cannot sustain. Either you cross, or you break the gates." Harry stood up. The silt around him swirled into a vortex. "I'm not crossing until the debt is settled. There is one piece of the puzzle left. A piece even Tom didn't know he had. The girl." Harry didn't answer. He surged upward. Hogwarts, the Great Hall, midnight. The castle was asleep, but Ginny Weasley was awake. She sat at the Gryffindor table, a single candle burning in front of her. She wasn't studying. She was staring at her own hands. Ever since the chamber, ever since the diary, she had felt it. A cold spot in the center of her chest that never went away. Harry had saved her, yes. He had pulled her soul back from the brink. But in doing so, he had left a fingerprint of the Veil on her soul. The doors of the Great Hall didn't open. They simply ceased to be a barrier. Harry walked in. He looked like a man made of smoke and starlight. His presence made the candle flame turn a sharp, electric blue. "Harry," Ginny whispered. She didn't sound afraid. She sounded relieved. "I knew you'd come. The cold, it's been getting louder." Harry stopped 10 feet from her. He looked at her not with the eyes of a boy, but with the clinical gaze of a reaper. He saw it, the tether. A thin, translucent thread of silver gray connecting Ginny to the void. It wasn't a Horcrux. It was a resonance, because she had been possessed by the diary for a year. Her soul had learned the frequency of the dead. "You're a doorway, Ginny," Harry said. "The veil is using you as a vent. If I don't close it, you'll slowly fade until there's nothing left but a shadow in a school uniform." Quote, "Then close it," she said, standing up. She walked toward him, her footsteps steady. "I've spent years being the girl who was saved. I'd rather be the girl who finished the job." Harry reached out his hand. He hesitated. For the first time since he was a child on a doorstep, he felt the weight of his own humanity. To close the vent, he had to touch her soul. And his touch was the end of all things. "It will hurt," Harry warned. "I've been hurt by the best, Potter," Ginny said with a ghost of a smile. "Do your worst." Harry placed his palm over her heart. The great hall erupted, not with fire, but with a shockwave of memories. Harry saw the diary. He saw the snake. He saw the years of Ginny's loneliness, her fear, her strength. He felt the veil trying to pull her in, trying to use her as a bridge to return to the world of the living. "No," Harry growled. He didn't pull, he pushed. He poured his own essence, the power of the Master of Death, into the gap in Ginny's soul. He wasn't killing the connection, he was sealing it with his own signature. The stone on his hand flared so bright it blinded the portraits on the walls. The cloak around his shoulders billowed, wrapping both of them in a cocoon of absolute silence. Ginny gasped, her back arching as the silver thread was severed. The cold in her chest didn't vanish, it crystallized. It became a part of her. A shield rather than a wound. Harry slumped forward, his forehead resting on her shoulder. He was shaking. The matte black of his skin was flickering, revealing the pale, exhausted boy underneath. Is it done?" Ginny wheezed, clutching his arms. "It's done," Harry whispered. "The bridge is closed. You're yours again." But the cost was immediate. By sealing the final resonance, Harry had used the last of his tether to the physical plane. He began to dissolve. His hands turned into ash and starlight right before her eyes. "Harry, no." Ginny reached for him, but her NDS passed through his chest as if he were mist. "It's okay, Ginny," Harry said, his voice sounding like it was coming from miles away. "I've been a ghost for a long time. I just needed to make sure the door was locked behind me." He looked up at the enchanted ceiling. The stars were clear and bright. For the first time, they didn't look like distant fires. They looked like home. "Tell Hermione, tell Ron, the balance is held," Harry said. He looked at Ginny one last time. In that moment, he wasn't the king of the veil. He wasn't the master of death. He was just Harry. "Don't wait for me," he whispered. With a soft, melodic chime, Harry Potter shattered. He didn't leave a body. He didn't leave ash. He turned into 1,000 silver motes of light that rose toward the ceiling, passing through the stone and into the night sky. The great hall fell into a silence so profound it felt like a prayer. Ginny stood alone in the dark, the blue candle flicker dying out. She felt the strength in her chest, the cold shield Harry had left her. She wasn't the girl who was saved. She was the witness, the veil, the frontier. Harry stood at the edge of the true void. Not the gray, not the station, but the end. Thanatos stood beside him. The entity's mask was gone, revealing a face that was just a reflection of Harry's own. "You gave it all away," the entity said. "The power, the hallows, the immortality. You gave it to a girl and a world that will forget you in 3 generations." Harry looked out into the infinite black. "I didn't give it away. I invested it." He reached into the air and pulled out a single, glowing thread of silver, the resonance he had taken from Ginny. He didn't throw it away. He wove it into the fabric of the veil itself. "As long as that thread exists," Harry said, "the dark will have a limit. Death will have a face. And the living will have a choice." Harry stepped forward, walking into the absolute dark. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He had balanced the books. He had paid the debt. And as the Master of Death disappeared into the silence, the veil finally, mercifully, went still. End of Chapter 14. Chapter 15. The Requiem of the Reaper. The world didn't forget Harry Potter. But it stopped speaking his name in whispers. Decades trickled by like sand through an hourglass with no bottom. The wizarding world entered an era of unprecedented peace, governed not by fear, but by a lingering collective memory of the cold. The Potter years became a mythic era, a time when the sky turned purple and the dead walked the earth to settle the score. But every debt has a final installment. Hogwarts still stood, though it was now more of a cathedral to the impossible than a simple school. On the anniversary of the Battle of the North Tower, a woman walked the grounds. She was old, her red hair turned to a shock of elegant white, her eyes still carrying that spark of crystallized frost that no sun could melt. Ginny Weasley sat by the Black Lake. The water was as smooth as obsidian. "It's been a long run, Harry," she whispered to the wind. "Hermione's gone. Ron's waiting on the other side. Even the Malfoy boy passed last winter, looking like he'd finally forgiven himself. I'm the last one left who remembers the smell of the ozone when you walked into a room." The water didn't ripple, the wind didn't blow, but the shadows at her feet began to lengthen, stretching out toward the lake as if they were reaching for a hand. "The Ministry wants to tear down the North Tower again," Ginny said, a dry chuckle escaping her. "They say it's a safety hazard. They don't realize it's the only thing keeping the roof on the world." They never did have much of an imagination. The voice didn't come from the air. It came from the marrow of her bones. Ginny didn't jump, she didn't scream, she simply turned her head. Standing beside her was a boy. He looked 17, his messy black hair windswept, his green eyes no longer glowing with the terrifying white of the Reaper, but with a deep, peaceful emerald. He was wearing a simple gray sweater and jeans, the clothes of a boy who lived, not a god who ruled. "Harry," she breathed. "I promised I wouldn't make you wait," Harry said. His voice was warm, carrying the American lilt he'd picked up from a million souls in the gray. "But time works differently in the deep. I had to make sure the anchors were completely dissolved. I had to wait for the last person who knew my face to be ready." Ginny looked at her withered hands, then back at his ageless face. "I'm ready. I've been ready since the Great Hall." Harry reached out his hand. It wasn't blackened, it wasn't translucent, it was solid, warm, and real. "The veil is closed, Ginny. The hallows are gone. The stone is dust, the wand is ash, and the cloak is just a memory." Harry smiled, and it was the first genuine smile he had ever worn. "There's no master of death anymore. Just us." Ginny took his hand. As her fingers closed around his, he weight of 80 years fell away from her like a heavy cloak. Her white hair bled back into vibrant red. The aches in her joints vanished. The world around them, the castle, the lake, the trees, didn't disappear, but it shifted. Becoming more vivid, more gold, more right. They weren't standing on the shore of the Black Lake anymore. They were standing in a meadow that stretched forever, under a sky that had no need for a sun because the light came from everything. "Where are we?" she asked. "The place beyond the veil," Harry said. "The real one, not the station, not the gray, the place where the stories actually end." In the distance, Ginny saw figures running toward them. A woman with dark hair. A man with glasses. A boy with red hair and a goofy grin. "Is everyone there?" Ginny asked, her voice breaking with joy. "Everyone who ever loved," Harry said. He looked back one last time toward the world of the living. He saw the North Tower of Hogwarts. He saw the students in the Great Hall. He saw the cycle of life continuing. Messy and fragile and beautiful, no longer haunted by the ghost of a Dark Lord or the shadow of a Reaper. He had done his job. He had balanced the scales. He had taken the hits so they didn't have to. Harry Potter, the boy claimed by the veil, the king of the gray, and the master of the end, turned his back on the dark forever. He walked into the light with the girl who had waited, and as they merged into the crowd of souls, the tear in the universe finally stitched itself shut. The legend was over. The peace was absolute. Epilogue. The whisper in the wind. Centuries later, a young student at Hogwarts found a cracked piece of black stone in the dirt near the Black Lake. It was just a pebble, really. It didn't glow. It didn't hum. It didn't promise power. The student threw the stone into the water, watching the ripples spread until they touched the shore. "What was that?" his friend asked. "Nothing," the student said. "Just a rock." And in the silence of the after, a faint, American accented laugh echoed on the breeze, disappearing before anyone could truly hear it. The debt was paid. The shepherd was home. The end.